At some point in your life, you're going to look around and realize no one's coming. Not your parents, not your mentor, not your friends, your boss, your partner, or the government. No one is going to swoop in with a perfect plan to rescue you from your fears, your mess, your indecision, or your unrealized potential. And if you keep waiting for someone to fix it, your life, your mind, your pain, it's going to cost you everything. This is one of the most brutal truths of all. Because deep down, we all carry this quiet hope that someone somewhere will recognize our struggle and step in. That if we just hold on long enough, help will arrive. A sign, a solution, a savior. But it doesn't. Most people live and die in that waiting room, stalling their potential, deferring their dreams, softening their pain with distractions, because they're still hoping someone else will take responsibility for the storm inside them. And it's understandable, because the alternative is terrifying. The alternative is this. It's you. It's always been you. You're the only one who can choose to change your habits. The only one who can face your regrets. The only one who can pull yourself out of the emotional pit that's quietly consuming your life. Even when someone offers support, it's still on you to accept it, act on it, and carry it forward. No one can do the painful work of transformation for you. That part, the real part, is non-transferable. You'll meet people who can teach you, people who love you, people who believe in you, and those people matter. But they cannot live your life for you. They cannot give you your self-respect. They cannot magically rewrite the habits and fears that have shaped your identity. That's your burden and your freedom. Because here's the twist. Once you truly understand that no one's coming, you stop waiting. And that's when life starts to change. You stop handing your power to fate or to circumstances or to some future version of yourself that doesn't exist. You stop fantasizing that someone else will hand you clarity or confidence or courage, and you start building them yourself, slowly, painfully, inconsistently, but deliberately. It's one of the hardest truths to swallow, but it's also one of the most liberating, because the second you stop looking outside yourself, you gain access to something terrifyingly real: agency. You're the one who has to clean up your mental mess. You're the one who has to get up after failing. You're the one who has to choose to break cycles, to face hard conversations, to walk away from what's killing you, even if it feels safe. Nobody's coming. But maybe, just maybe, that's not a curse. Maybe it's a call, because if nobody's coming, then you're free to become the kind of person who doesn't need saving. Not because you're invincible, but because you stopped waiting. And you started showing up for yourself. The truth often hurts more than the lie. We grow up being told that truth is good, that honesty is noble, that facing reality makes us stronger. But here's the part no one says. The truth can hurt far more than the lie ever did. And sometimes we prefer the lie, not because we're weak, but because we're human. Think about it. It's easier to believe that person loved you than to face the fact that they used you. It's easier to believe your boss just forgot about your promotion than admit they never intended to give you one. It's easier to believe your parent did their best than accept they didn't protect you when it mattered most. Lies protect us, not just from others, but from emotional collapse. They give us a version of reality we can tolerate. They delay the pain. They simplify the story. But the truth, the real, raw, unfiltered truth, it can shatter you. It forces you to reprocess everything you thought you understood. It makes you question your memories, your choices, your worth. It brings grief, anger, shame, regret, loss. And that's why your brain often fights it. In psychology, this is called cognitive dissonance, the discomfort you feel when reality conflicts with your beliefs. And to escape that discomfort, most people don't adjust their beliefs. They adjust the story. They downplay the betrayal. They reframe the trauma. They rewrite history in softer terms. Not because they're liars, but because the truth feels like a threat. Here's a brutal example. Someone grows up believing they had a happy childhood, no major problems, just the normal stuff. But then one day, a memory comes back. Something subtle, but wrong. Emotional neglect, silent treatment, verbal cruelty disguised as discipline. Now they're faced with two options: accept that their caregivers failed them in real ways and face the sadness, the confusion, the anger, or explain it away. They meant well. They had it worse. It wasn't abuse. It was tough love. Guess which one most people choose? That's the power of a lie. It gives you a reality you don't have to heal from. But here's where it gets dangerous. The longer you live in the lie, the more it costs you. You stay in relationships that slowly erode your confidence because you tell yourself it's just a rough patch. You stay in jobs that suck your life dry because you convince yourself you're lucky to have one at all. You keep toxic people in your life because you tell yourself family is forever, or maybe they'll change. But the truth is, sitting there waiting, quietly asking, what is this really costing you? And deep down, you know. That's why truth hurts, because it demands something. It demands that you act, that you change, that you let go, that you mourn. Lies let you stay still. Truth forces you to move. But here's what makes the truth worth it. Even when it's brutal, it ends the war between your gut and your mind. Because even if you say things are fine, your body knows when they're not. You feel it in your sleep, in your anxiety, in your anger, in your exhaustion. Truth hurts, but it also clears the fog. It frees you from the loop of confusion. It puts reality back in your hands, even if it breaks your heart at first. So, no, the truth isn't always kind, but the lie doesn't love you either. The lie keeps you quiet. The truth makes you real. And that's why the truth will always be harder. But eventually, if you're willing to face it, it will also be lighter. Comfort is more addictive than growth. If you think addiction only applies to substances, alcohol, nicotine, dopamine hits, you're missing the most powerful one of all. Comfort. Comfort doesn't feel like an addiction because it wears the mask of peace. It tells you, you've earned this. You deserve to relax. You don't need to push so hard anymore. And you believe it because comfort feels safe, predictable, familiar. It doesn't scare you, and it doesn't judge you. But here's the truth. Most people never realize until too late. Comfort quietly kills potential. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, one easy day at a time. Every species on Earth adapts under pressure. Muscles grow when they're torn. Trees strengthen when they fight wind. The human mind expands when it's challenged. Yet most of us spend our lives building walls to avoid discomfort and then wonder why we feel stuck, bored, unfulfilled. We think we're protecting our happiness when in reality we're numbing our growth. Take this simple example. Someone dreams of writing a book. They love the idea. They tell their friends. They imagine the cover, the title, the readers. But when it's time to actually sit down and write, they don't. They clean the kitchen. They scroll their phone. They reorganize their workspace. Not because they're lazy, but because comfort whispers, you can do it later. Don't stress yourself tonight. A week passes, then a month, then a year. And nothing changes, except the weight of regret. The same thing happens with relationships. People stay in almost right situations because leaving would mean facing loneliness. They stay in jobs that drain them because quitting means uncertainty. They hold on to habits that quietly destroy them because changing would mean rebuilding from zero. Comfort tells them it's fine. That stability is worth the cost. But stability isn't the same as peace. Sometimes it's just fear dressed as maturity. Psychologists call this homeostasis, the body and mind's tendency to resist change and stay balanced. It's a biological survival mechanism that once kept us alive in the wild. But in modern life, it traps us in emotional cages we don't even notice. It's why people sabotage opportunities, why they talk about change but never follow through, why they crave progress but cling to routine. Because deep down, they don't actually want growth. They want comfort disguised as growth. Something that looks productive but doesn't hurt. Something that feels like progress without demanding sacrifice. A new hobby instead of a new mindset. A planner instead of a plan. Comfort is clever that way. It gives you the illusion of control while quietly stealing your future. And that's what makes it more dangerous than any drug. Drugs make you aware you're escaping. Comfort convinces you that you're not. It doesn't ruin you in chaos. It ruins you in calm. You won't see it happening. You'll just notice your dreams shrinking, your curiosity fading, your edges dulling. You'll call it contentment. But it's not. It's emotional sedation, the slow death of drive. This doesn't mean you have to live in pain or hustle endlessly. Real growth doesn't mean constant suffering. It just means you have to make friends with discomfort, learn to sit in the unease of progress instead of escaping it. Because every meaningful thing in life has a stretch before it has a payoff. Love requires vulnerability. Growth requires awkwardness. Learning requires confusion. Freedom requires risk. And if you keep choosing comfort over those things, you'll wake up one day realizing that what you called peace was just avoidance. The truth is, comfort will always invite you back. It will always sound kinder. It will always promise rest. But the people who end up fulfilled, they're not the ones who avoided discomfort. They're the ones who learned to use it. Because the place you're afraid to go is usually the place where life begins again. You don't need to be fixed, just faced. Why do so many intelligent, capable people still feel broken? They read the books, meditate, reflect, do the inner work. And still, something feels off, like there's a version of them that's correct, and they're always falling short of it. It's easy to assume this is a modern problem, the curse of self-help culture. But it's not new. Carl Jung once observed that most people don't suffer from mental illness. They suffer from meaninglessness. They don't need correction. They need contact with the parts of themselves they've hidden. Because here's the twist, much of what you think needs to be fixed about a person was never broken. It was built, constructed. One moment at a time, usually for good reason. Take the case of Alex, a talented software engineer who could never say no to anything, burned out, overwhelmed, and constantly apologizing. He thought he had a boundary problem, or maybe a self-esteem issue. But the truth? His entire childhood revolved around managing a chaotic household where saying no got you punished. So he adapted by becoming agreeable, invisible, indispensable. Now imagine trying to fix that with just set boundaries. You're not solving the problem, you're skipping the history. This is where most frameworks fall short. They treat symptoms like character flaws. They hand you tactics before asking the deeper question, why did this pattern make sense in the first place? You can't fix what you refuse to understand. In neuroscience, there's a principle called Hebb's law. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Repeated behaviors carve literal pathways in the brain. That's not poetry, it's anatomy. And those pathways don't vanish with affirmations. They shift slowly, only when the conditions that built them are brought into awareness, which means facing the pattern is the start, not fixing it. Because what people call healing isn't an upgrade. It's an unlearning. It's peeling back the protective layers, the overcorrections, the masks that once kept us safe. That takes courage. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's subtle. It requires sitting with discomfort, watching it without numbing, naming it without flinching. And doing this not to get rid of it, but to see where it came from. Some of the strongest people you know aren't the ones who fix themselves. They're the ones who face themselves. They stopped outsourcing their worth to self-help plans. They stopped labeling themselves as defective, and instead, they got curious about their own wiring. Here's the truth. Most people don't need a new system. They need an honest mirror. Not one that flatters. Not one that punishes. One that reflects clearly what's been there all along, waiting to be seen. You'll die with unfinished business. We like to imagine that life is a story with a satisfying ending, that will tie up every loose thread, fix every relationship, reach every goal, and neatly close every chapter before the final page. But the truth is far colder than that. You will die with unfinished business. Not everything you start will get finished. Not every dream will come true. Not every wound will heal. Not every person will understand you or forgive you. And that's not a failure of life. It is life. We live with this quiet fantasy that if we just work hard enough, plan carefully enough, and think everything through, the pieces will all come together. That one day we'll reach a point where everything finally feels complete. But no one ever does. History is filled with evidence of this. Leonardo da Vinci left hundreds of sketches and experiments unfinished, projects that obsessed him until the day he died. Kafka told his friend to burn all his unpublished works because he never felt they were ready. Musicians, scientists, and writers across centuries have died mid-sentence, mid-chapter, mid-dream. But you don't need to be a genius to experience that truth. Look around, relationships that ended without closure, conversations you meant to have but never did, things you meant to say but waited too long, the apology that stayed half-written, the book you never started, the habit you never broke, the version of yourself you always meant to become but didn't. Life doesn't stop neatly. It just stops. And the reason that's such a hard truth to face is because our minds crave completion. Psychologists call it the Zeigarnik effect, the tendency to remember unfinished tasks more than finished ones. Your brain keeps the door open, the process running, the file half-loaded, trying to resolve what never got resolved. That's why people stay haunted by what if. It's the brain's unfinished story loop. But the deeper reason we resist this truth is emotional. We want control. We want to believe we can fix everything, tie everything up, and leave behind a perfect legacy. But real life doesn't obey that logic. It's messy, interrupted, incomplete. And when you fight that reality, you end up living anxiously, trying to finish life instead of living it. Here's the paradox. The more you try to control how your story ends, the less you actually experience it. Because you're too busy polishing, preparing, and perfecting to notice what's already slipping away. You won't send every message you mean to. You won't make peace with everyone you've hurt. You won't get to explain your side or see every dream fulfilled or find the perfect moment to say goodbye. No one does, but maybe that's not tragic. Maybe it's what makes life beautiful, that it's full of beginnings that never find their endings, and endings that come without warning. It means you have to learn to live mid-sentence, to find meaning in the unfinished, to say what you need to say while you still can, to accept that the people you love might never understand everything about you and love them anyway. We often wait to live fully until everything feels stable, organized, complete. But by the time life is tidy, it's almost over. The art of living isn't about completion. It's about presence. Da Vinci never finished the Mona Lisa. Beethoven died with sketches of his 10th symphony incomplete. And you'll leave projects, promises, and possibilities behind too. But here's the truth that redeems it. Life isn't measured by what you finish. It's measured by what you begin. So don't waste your life trying to close every loop. Start things that matter. Love people deeply, even if the ending hurts. Learn without ever feeling done. And when your story stops mid-paragraph, as all stories do, let it, because perfection isn't the point of life. Participation is, and unfinished doesn't mean wasted. It means you were still creating until the end. You will defend a lie if it feels safe. There's a strange case from 1977. A woman named Mary, in her mid-30s, showed up at a small-town hospital with burns and bruises, claiming to have escaped from a secretive cult that practiced bizarre rituals. Her story made headlines. Books were written. Talk shows invited her. She became the face of survival. But years later, after investigative journalists and former members came forward, the entire story unraveled. No cult. No evidence. And Mary, she wasn't scamming for money. She wasn't unstable. She believed it all. Not because it was true, but because the lie gave her something the truth never did, meaning attention and a framework to make sense of her chaos. And that's the unnerving part. We assume people lie for gain, but the brain doesn't always need a reward. Sometimes it just needs relief. If a lie gives you coherence, identity, safety, you'll protect it like it's sacred, even if it's silently hurting you. This happens on every level. People stay in abusive jobs, telling themselves it's just a tough industry. They cling to childhood stories like, "I'm just not creative," because shedding them would mean confronting decades of missed opportunities. They believe nobody can be trusted, not because it's true, but because trusting once got them shattered. These aren't logical decisions, they're emotional defense mechanisms disguised as belief. In psychology, this is known as cognitive dissonance reduction. When two conflicting ideas exist, "I'm smart" versus "I made a terrible decision," the brain doesn't try to reconcile them honestly. It bends reality to protect its identity, which is why smart people sometimes double down on provably false ideas. Why charismatic leaders can build loyal followers on a foundation of delusion. Why even you, when confronted with a truth that threatens your worldview, might reflexively look away. It's not about ignorance, it's about protection. And the most dangerous lies are the ones that don't look like lies. They just look like personality. "I've always been this way. I just hate people. I'm not good with money. I'm not the kind of person who every one of those could be a fortress." Built not to deceive others, but to protect ourselves from growth we're not ready for. So how do you tell the difference between a belief and a protective lie? Here's a clue. If questioning it makes you feel defensive, it's not a belief, it's armor. And like all armor, it was built for a reason. You don't need to tear it off. Just notice it, explore it. Ask where it came from, not to destroy it, but to understand the fear it was covering. Because once a lie is faced without judgment, it starts to loosen on its own. Truth isn't always about proving something. Sometimes it's about removing what no longer needs protecting. You're free when you stop needing permission. When Catherine Switzer signed up to run the Boston Marathon in 1967, she used her initials, KV. Switzer, because women weren't allowed to run marathons back then. People believed it was too dangerous for women to run that far. Halfway through the race, one of the officials saw her and got angry. He ran into the street and tried to physically pull her out of the race. He even tried to tear her number off her shirt. But she kept running. She finished, and by doing that, she changed history. Here's the key part. She didn't ask anyone if she was allowed. That's something many people never learn. Most of us grow up thinking that someone needs to say okay before we do anything important. We wait for permission from teachers, bosses, family, or society to speak up, to start something, to be ourselves. But here's the truth, that permission rarely comes. No one shows up with a sign saying, "You're ready now. You're allowed." You could wait your whole life for someone to tell you that you're good enough to start that project, strong enough to leave that bad situation, or smart enough to share your ideas. Instead, the people who move forward, the ones who build things, change careers, say what they really think. They all do one thing first. They stop waiting. They act as if they already have permission, and by doing that, they create their own. This doesn't mean being careless. It means realizing that most of the rules holding you back are invisible, made up by people just like you. A lot of what we call rules are really just social habits or fears passed down from others. For example, maybe someone wants to start a YouTube channel, but they stop themselves thinking, "Who am I to do that?" Or someone wants to write a book, but feels like they need a degree first. Or someone stays in a relationship because they're waiting for others to say it's okay to leave. In every case, they're stuck because they're waiting to be told. Yes, you're allowed, but adulthood is strange. Nobody's in charge. Everyone's just figuring things out as they go. The truth is, most of the people you look up to, creators, leaders, experts, felt like imposters at first, but they kept going anyway. And over time, that pretending turned into something real. Freedom begins when you stop asking the world for approval. If you want to start, start. If you want to speak, speak. If you want to build something, begin now, not when someone tells you to. Now. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need a badge. The moment you stop waiting is the moment you're free. You lie to yourself every day. You're probably lying right now, not to someone else, to yourself. And you're not doing it because you're a bad person. You're doing it because your brain is wired to protect you from discomfort, from shame, from the terrifying idea that maybe you're the problem. Self-deception is one of the most advanced features of human intelligence, and no one's immune to it. You tell yourself, I'll start tomorrow, even though you've said that every day this week. You say, I'm not upset, while your jaw is clenched and you haven't blinked in 30 seconds. You say, it's not that big of a deal, when it clearly is. You tell yourself you're being logical when really you're just afraid. These aren't random quirks, they're psychological defense mechanisms, and you're using them all the time. Take rationalization, for example. You don't want to go to the gym, so you tell yourself, my body needs rest. You don't want to have that hard conversation, so you say, now's just not the right time. Or confirmation bias. You believe you're a good person, so you ignore the times you were kind of a jerk. But if someone else messes up once, suddenly their entire character is under review. Then there's the sunk cost fallacy, staying in a bad relationship or job because you've already put so much into it, like a gambler refusing to walk away because they've already lost too much. These aren't rare bugs in your thinking. They're features. Your brain is trying to help you feel okay, not to be accurate. In fact, studies in neuroscience have shown that the same regions of the brain that light up when you're telling the truth also activate when you tell yourself something you want to be true. That's why the lies feel real. It's also why smart people, really smart people, can be the most delusional. Because the better you are at thinking, the better you are at building elaborate justifications for your own behavior. You can convince yourself of anything, that the relationship isn't that bad. That procrastinating is part of your creative process, that your boss just doesn't see your potential, that it's totally fine to buy something you can't afford because, technically, it's on sale. Your brain doesn't care whether it's true, it cares whether the story helps you function. That's the survival logic behind self-deception. But here's the problem. Those lies build up. And over time, they make it harder to see where you really are. You can't grow from a fake version of yourself. You can't improve if you've convinced yourself there's nothing to improve. You can't fix what you won't admit is broken, even a little bit. And that's where self-honesty becomes the game changer. Not brutal self-judgment, not shame spirals. But that quiet, calm wait, is that actually true? Moment, self-honesty doesn't mean beating yourself up. It means catching yourself in the story and gently asking, what else could be true here? That's how people change. Not by forcing themselves into some ideal version of who they're supposed to be, but by slowly, bravely telling the truth to the one person they lie to the most. And yes, it's uncomfortable, but it's also freedom. Because once you start telling the truth to yourself, you don't need to pretend anymore. And that feels better than any lie ever did. You will be judged for your healing. It sounds backwards, doesn't it? You'd think that when you try to grow, to heal, to become more honest, more clear, more whole, people would support that. Cheer it on. Respect the work it takes. But that's not what usually happens. When you start to heal, something strange occurs. People begin to resist you, criticize you, misunderstand you. Not because you're wrong, but because your healing disrupts the roles they placed you in. You're not playing the part anymore. You're not being who they expect. and that threatens something. Maybe you used to say yes to everything. Keep the peace. Swallow your pain to avoid confrontation, but now you're setting boundaries, saying no, speaking up. Suddenly, you're selfish, or difficult, or not who you used to be. Maybe you used to agree with their version of events. Go along with the family story, the groupthink, the unspoken rules. But now you're naming what really happened. You're admitting the harm. You're refusing to stay silent. Now you're disrespectful, ungrateful, toxic. But here's what most people don't realize. Healing isn't soft. It's disruptive. Real healing doesn't just soothe you, it changes you. It alters what you tolerate. It shatters old stories. It forces hard decisions. And that makes people uncomfortable because your healing reminds them of their own avoidance. It calls out the systems they benefit from. It highlights the emotional work they've never done. And when they see you evolve, it threatens the fragile world they've built around denial and control. So they push back. They'll say you've changed, like that's a bad thing. They'll say you're overreacting because your truth scares them. They'll tell you to just move on, not because they care about peace, but because your pain is inconvenient. But hear this clearly. Being judged for healing is part of healing. It's the part where you learn to stop performing, to stop trying to win back people who only loved the version of you that stayed small, to stop apologizing for growing. And yes, it hurts. It hurts to be misunderstood. It hurts to lose people. It hurts to be seen as the problem when you're finally trying to solve one. But that pain is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're doing something real. The people who truly want what's best for you will adjust. They'll evolve too, or they'll cheer you on from afar. But some people won't. Some will leave. Some will fight to drag you back into the version of you that made them feel more comfortable. Let them. Your healing was never meant to make everyone else feel safe. It was meant to make you whole. You get older whether you're ready or not. There's something strange about getting older. Not the birthdays, not the wrinkles or the gray hairs, but that quiet, creeping feeling that the timeline you imagined doesn't care about you. You can ignore it. You can tell yourself there's plenty of time. But the truth is, you age whether you're ready or not. And that wouldn't be so terrifying if life waited for you to catch up. But it doesn't. You know that feeling when a year passes and you can't even remember what you did? That's not just nostalgia. That's a warning. People think aging is this slow, graceful process, but a lot of the time it feels more like an ambush. One day you're 22 thinking you've got decades to figure things out, and then suddenly you're 35, wondering when exactly that later you were counting on is supposed to begin. And it's not just about career or relationships or money. It's about identity, about who you're becoming. Because every year you delay the hard conversations, the real decisions, the honest questions. You don't just stay still, you drift. And the scary part is, you might not notice it happening. Life doesn't tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, it's time to become who you're meant to be. It just keeps moving. And either you move with it, or you look up one day and realize you've been living someone else's timeline. The job that was supposed to be temporary. It became your career. The relationship you weren't sure about. Now it's a mortgage and a child. The passion project you swore you'd start someday. You're still just talking about it. And look, this isn't about regret. It's about urgency, because not ready is a myth. Nobody's ready. Nobody feels like the time is perfect, but the years keep arriving anyway. They don't pause until you figure yourself out. So what happens if you keep waiting? You don't feel the cost immediately. That's the trick. You still go to work. You still hang out with friends. Life seems fine. But quietly, invisibly, the opportunities you were meant for start passing you by, and you don't even know it because you never saw them coming. That's the brutal part. Aging isn't a thief that robs you overnight. It's a river, and if you don't learn to swim, it'll carry you somewhere you never meant to go. So here's the shift. Stop asking, am I ready yet? And start asking, if not now, then when? Because time won't ask for your permission. It just keeps going. Some people will never say thank you, even if you save them. You're there at 2 a.m. when no one else picks up. You listen to the same story for the 10th time, offer advice, drop everything to show up. You rearrange your life because in that moment it feels like they need you, and you tell yourself, that's what good people do. And for a while, you believe that effort meant something. You expect, maybe not praise, but acknowledgement. A simple, thank you. I couldn't have done it without you. Something human, but then it ends. The crisis, the moment, the drama, and they vanish. They ghost you, or change the subject, or act like it never happened. No gratitude, no follow-up, just silence. And you sit there wondering, did they forget? Did they care? No, they remember. They care, but they can't thank you. Because to do that, to look you in the eye and say, you saved me, would mean admitting just how much power they gave you. And for some people, that's unbearable. See, gratitude sounds simple, but it's not. It's exposing, vulnerable. It's an admission. I needed you. And in a world where everyone's trying to look independent, controlled, put together, that admission feels like weakness. So instead, they rewrite the story. It wasn't that bad. I would have figured it out anyway. You were just doing what any decent person would do. They shrink your role because it helps them feel bigger. Because deep down, they don't want to remember being helpless, even if it was you who helped them survive it. This isn't about narcissism, it's about discomfort. There's a psychological reflex, a self-protective trick of the mind that kicks in when someone feels indebted. If they can't repay you, they'll often resent you. It doesn't make sense, but it's common. Because when someone can't match what you gave, their pride doesn't say, thank them anyway. It says pull away, minimize it. Pretend it didn't happen. And if they do say thank you, sometimes it's once and never again. Because keeping you close would mean constantly being reminded of a version of themselves they don't want to remember. This happens in families, in friendships, in breakups. You were the one who held them together, and now you're the one they pretend isn't part of their story. It's cruel, but it's not random. Because when you help someone survive their lowest moment, you become part of that moment. And if they're trying to move on, they might feel like they have to leave you behind too, just to escape the memory of who they were. It hurts. Badly. You want to believe your kindness meant something, that it changed something, that the bond created in that pain would last. But sometimes your help becomes invisible the moment it's no longer needed. So here's what you learn. You don't help people because they'll thank you. You help them because you decided to be that kind of person, and then you let go. Because the ones who don't say thank you aren't evil, they're just unfinished. Still building the parts of themselves that can admit, I didn't do it alone, and maybe, just maybe, years from now, something you said will echo back to them. Not out loud, not in words, but in how they treat someone else. They may never thank you directly, but they'll become someone better because of you. And that's a kind of gratitude too, the kind you'll never hear, but helped create. You will be misunderstood. You can say the exact right thing, at the exact right time, with all the clarity, honesty, and care in the world, and still, they'll hear something else entirely. Because people don't hear what you say, they hear what they're ready to understand. It's one of the hardest things to accept. You try to be kind, patient, precise. You choose your words carefully. You explain your side without blaming. You think, if I just speak clearly, they'll get it. But communication isn't about what leaves your mouth. It's about how it lands in their mind. And that landing zone? It's not neutral. It's shaped by their past, their triggers, their fears, their need to protect themselves from anything that makes them feel small, guilty, or exposed. Their ears aren't open. They're armored. So when you say, that hurt me, they hear, you're a terrible person. When you say, I need space, they hear, you're not worth staying for. When you say, I need to speak my truth, they hear, I'm rejecting yours. And suddenly, you're defending something you never even said. This happens because the human brain is wired not for truth, but for narrative coherence. It doesn't process each word like a robot. It connects meaning based on past emotional patterns. If someone's been hurt before, or made to feel like the villain, they'll often interpret neutral feedback as an attack. Psychologists call this projection, when a person unconsciously assigns their internal feelings onto someone else's words or actions. You say, I felt ignored, and they respond with anger, not because you were aggressive, but because your pain triggered their shame, and shame doesn't sit quietly. It fights back. This is why relationships, even close ones, break down, not because of what's said, but because of what's heard. People don't want to hear that they failed you, that they missed something, that they weren't the person they believed themselves to be in your life. So instead of facing that, they distort what you said. They reduce you to dramatic, ungrateful, cold, too sensitive. And in that moment, they don't have to change. You become the problem. It doesn't mean they're bad people. It means they're protecting a version of themselves that can't bear to feel flawed. And this is where the heartbreak lives, in realizing that sometimes, no matter how gently or bravely you speak, someone will refuse to hear you, not because you were wrong, but because they need you to be wrong in order to feel okay. So what do? You learn to stop chasing understanding from people who are emotionally allergic to self-reflection. You stop over-explaining, stop rewarding, stop replaying the same conversation, hoping it will land differently this time. You understand that being misunderstood isn't a reflection of your clarity. It's a reflection of their capacity. You keep speaking with honesty, but you stop tying your worth to whether someone receives it the way you intended. Because yes, being misunderstood hurts. But bending yourself just to be understood, that slowly erases you. You become what you repeatedly do, not what you intend. We all have some version of a future self in our head. The fitter you, the kinder you. The more successful, organized, mindful, respected, fulfilled version of you. You picture that version when you buy a self-help book or a gym membership or start planning Monday's new routine. But here's the twist. Most people miss. Your intentions don't shape you. Your habits do. You are not what you say you want. You are what you do, especially when no one's watching. That's why the person who intends to write a novel but scrolls TikTok every night isn't a writer. The person who plans to get healthy but orders fast food every time they're stressed isn't becoming healthier. And the person who wants deeper relationships but keeps ghosting people when things get vulnerable isn't becoming more connected. Wanting, hoping, visualizing, those aren't bad. But they're not enough. Because every time you repeat a behavior, you're casting a vote for the kind of person you're becoming, not with your words, with your actions. It's one of the simplest and most brutal truths in psychology. Repetition becomes identity. If you lie often enough, you become a liar. If you complain constantly, you become someone who sees the world as unfair. If you show up with consistency, even in small ways, you become someone trustworthy. The brain doesn't separate big and small actions. It just builds pathways, reinforces patterns. Every time you procrastinate, it becomes easier to procrastinate again. Every time you make excuses, it becomes harder to take ownership. And every time you follow through, even just a little, it becomes more natural to keep going. This is how momentum really works. It doesn't come from some surge of motivation or perfect conditions. It comes from doing something, even badly, and letting that repetition change your self-perception. You don't need a total overhaul. You need one tiny, consistent change repeated enough times that it stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like who you are. The person who flosses one tooth every night is far more likely to start flossing them all. The person who writes one sentence per day is 100x closer to finishing a book than the person who plans to write for hours but never does, because they're building identity, not just chasing outcomes. You're not stuck because you lack willpower. You're stuck because your brain believes what you do more than what you say. So if you're waiting for your life to align with your vision, but your daily habits look nothing like that life, don't be surprised when you become the kind of person who just keeps waiting. But the good news is, it works both ways. Change what you repeat, and you slowly change who you are. Reputation is built in years, destroyed in seconds. You can spend 15 years being known for one thing: reliability, honesty, leadership, kindness, and it takes only 15 seconds for that entire image to crack, not because you changed, but because someone caught a moment. One misstep, one angry message, one bad decision, and that moment became your headline. Think about it. A teacher devotes their career to helping students working late, paying out of pocket for supplies. But one joke taken the wrong way goes viral, and suddenly she's the unprofessional teacher on TikTok. No one remembers the thousands of lessons she prepared. They remember the 7 seconds that got clipped, or the manager who spends years mentoring junior staff. One day, in the pressure of a bad quarter, he snaps at someone in a meeting. Word spreads. He's toxic. Doesn't matter that he apologized. Doesn't matter that the junior employee later said it was resolved. He's now the guy you should avoid. Or worse, the false rumor. One ex-colleague doesn't like you. They imply things quietly. I've heard some stuff about them. And now even people who've never met you look sideways when your name comes up. You never get to sit in the room where your reputation is rewritten. That's what makes it so dangerous. Because people don't verify reputations. They inherit them. And they're more likely to remember the negative. It's how our brains evolved, a survival instinct to avoid potential threats. Psychologists call this negativity bias. One criticism hits harder than 5 compliments. One accusation is stickier than 1,000 clean records. Worse, the more moral the accusation, like being manipulative, dishonest, selfish, the harder it is to shake. People assume that where there's smoke, there's fire. But sometimes there's only smoke, and no one cares enough to look for the fire. Reputation isn't just about truth. It's about memory, and memory favors emotion over fact. It's why you don't remember all the times someone showed up for you, but you remember that one time they didn't. So yes, you can build your name slowly, deliberately, carefully. You can do everything right, but reputation isn't built on your effort. It's built on other people's perception, and perception can shift instantly. That doesn't mean you stop caring. But it means you stop thinking. Reputation is the same as character. Character is what you do when no one's watching. Reputation is what people say when you're not in the room. And sometimes those two have nothing to do with each other. This is why it's so important not to live for praise. Because the same crowd that claps for you today will call you a disappointment tomorrow, and you won't always get the chance to explain. So what do you hold on to? Not the applause, not the likes, not the narrative others have of you. You hold on to what's real, your track record, the people you've actually helped, the things you actually did, not the story that got told about you. Because that's all you can control. Your reputation might get taken from you, but your integrity, that's yours to keep. Time isn't on your side, it's your predator. We love to believe we have time. It's one of the most dangerous illusions we live under, that we'll figure it out later, that we'll apologize tomorrow, that we'll start chasing that dream when things finally calm down. But time doesn't wait. It doesn't pause when you're confused. It doesn't slow down while you get your life together. And it definitely doesn't care about your reasons, your fears, or your plans. Time just moves forward, and if you're not moving with it, it leaves you behind, quietly, brutally, without apology. Most people don't realize this until it's too late. They wake up one day and realize a decade has passed. That relationship they thought they'd fix someday? Gone. That career path they meant to explore? Closed. That version of themselves they were hoping to become? Lost in the fog of indecision and distraction. Here's the brutal truth. Time is not on your side. It is hunting you, not with malice, but with indifference. Think about it like this. If someone stole an hour from you every day, physically took it from your hands, you'd be outraged. But most of us give away our hours voluntarily. To scrolling, to meaningless conversations, to procrastination disguised as self-care, to numbing instead of healing. We act like we're immortal, like we have infinite tomorrows to get serious, to get brave, to get started. But you don't. You have a limited number of mornings left. A finite number of chances to say what you need to say. A ticking countdown of moments to do the thing that matters before it becomes something you'll only talk about in the past tense. And here's where it gets worse. Time punishes hesitation. The longer you wait, the more expensive the decision becomes. You can't run a marathon at 70 the same way you could at 30. You can't rebuild trust with someone who's already left. You can't start from scratch once the world has moved on without you. You don't just lose opportunities by waiting. You lose versions of yourself, versions that could have existed but didn't because you waited for certainty, or motivation, or the perfect conditions. But time doesn't deal in perfection. It deals in motion. That doesn't mean you have to rush, but it means you have to choose and keep choosing every single day, even when it's uncomfortable, even when the future isn't guaranteed. Because the truth is, the future isn't waiting for you. It's arriving with or without you. And if you're not careful, time will turn your life into a museum of almosts. Almost said it, almost did it, almost became it. So if there's something in your life that matters, go to war for it. You will never be less tired than you are now. Never be more ready. Never be less afraid. This is as good as it gets. And the clock is still ticking. Not to motivate you, but to remind you, time isn't your friend. It's your final opponent. And it's undefeated. People don't change. They reveal. We like to believe people change, that time, love, pain, or second chances will transform someone, that if they say they'll be different, they will be. That the toxic friend will become kind, that the manipulative partner will finally grow up, that the selfish parent will finally understand. But most of the time, they don't change. They just reveal. It's one of the hardest truths to accept, because it forces you to stop looking at who someone could be and start looking at who they are, not when they're performing, not when they're apologizing, not when they're promising, but when they're comfortable. See, in the beginning, or when stakes are high, people show you their presentation, their best version, their filtered self. They're attentive, polite, charming, sometimes even selfless. But that's not the truth. The truth is what they do when they're no longer afraid of losing you, when there's no longer anything to gain or prove, when they're tired, unfiltered, unwatched. That's when the real person comes out. Not the mask, not the highlight reel, but the patterns, the instincts, the reflexes. That's what you need to pay attention to. Because character isn't defined by what someone says they'll do. It's defined by what they repeatedly do, especially when no one's watching. Let's be clear. It's not that people are incapable of change. Some are, but real change is rare, and it's brutal. It requires radical self-awareness, humility, discomfort, and consistent effort over years, not days, not during arguments, not after being caught. Years, and most people don't want that. They want forgiveness without transformation. They want reconciliation without accountability. They want your trust, but they don't want to earn it again, so they promise they've changed. They say the right words. They even believe them, but then time passes, and the patterns return. The defensiveness, the blame, the disappearing, the gaslighting, the neglect. You see it all again, and this time it cuts deeper. because now you hoped it would be different. Here's the brutal truth. You weren't seeing a new version of them. You were seeing their disguise. And this truth isn't just about others. It's about you, too. You don't become better just because you want to, or because you feel guilty, or because you said you would. You become better when your habits change, when your instincts change, when your defaults change. And that takes brutal work most people avoid, so don't fall for potential. Don't invest in projections. Don't wait for someone to change into the person they keep promising to be. Watch what they reveal. And when someone shows you who they are, again and again, believe them, not because they're evil, but because they're unwilling to become someone different. And the longer you pretend otherwise, the more damage you'll take. This truth will save you years. Stop trying to turn people into something they've already proven they're not. You will rationalize anything to avoid change. Human beings aren't built for truth. We're built for comfort. We like to think we make decisions based on facts, logic, and reason, that we carefully weigh our options and do what's right or smart. But in reality, most of what we call logic is just a defense system for avoiding change. Change is threatening. It's uncertain. It demands energy, discomfort, sometimes even loss. So your mind will do something very clever. It will create stories to make staying the same feel reasonable. This is called rationalization. And once you start noticing it, you'll see it everywhere. You'll hear someone say, "It's not the right time to quit yet. Maybe I overreacted. It wasn't that bad. I think I just need to be more patient." They're trying, and that has to count for something. All of those might sound thoughtful. But often, they're not thoughtful at all. They're excuses in disguise. Carefully crafted lies we tell ourselves to avoid doing the hard thing. Because the truth might be, you hate your job and you're afraid to start over. You've been betrayed, and you're avoiding the grief. You're not being patient. You're being passive. They're not trying, they're stalling. But that kind of honesty is destabilizing. It asks too much. So the mind steps in and says, "Here's a softer story. Let's believe that instead." And it works. Until it doesn't. Until you wake up one day and realize you've been in the same pattern for years. Still stuck. Still justifying. Still hoping the circumstances will magically shift so you don't have to. Here's the thing no one tells you. The more intelligent you are, the better you are at rationalizing your own dysfunction. Smart people don't necessarily live better lives. They just tell better stories to themselves. They can build airtight justifications for staying in pain, for not growing, for not leaving, for not risking. They use logic like a shield, not to discover the truth, but to protect themselves from it. And it's terrifyingly effective. Because most of the time, the people around you won't challenge it. They'll agree. They'll echo your story. They'll nod and say, "You're doing the right thing," not because you are, but because they're avoiding something too. So what's the alternative? To become suspicious of your own explanations. To ask, what am I trying not to feel? What part of this logic is protecting me from change? That's not easy. It's disorienting. It means holding two things at once, compassion for your fear and accountability for your delay. But once you spot the pattern, you can't unsee it. You'll realize the problem wasn't lack of opportunity, or clarity, or time. It was you, choosing the comfort of a lie over the pain of becoming someone new. That's what makes this truth so brutal. You will defend your prison as long as it feels familiar, and your mind will build the bars. You are not the main character in anyone else's life. There's something you learn the hard way. You could call it a harsh truth. But it's more like a quiet shift, something that happens when you stop assuming everyone sees the world the way you do. You are not the main character in anyone else's story. It feels strange, almost insulting, to say that out loud. Of course you know everyone has their own life, their own goals, fears, and routines. But on some level, we still imagine we're central. That the people in our lives think about us the way we think about them. They don't. Most of the time, people are thinking about themselves, how they look, how they sound, how they're coming across. They're not ignoring you because they don't care. They're just trapped in their own mental world, the same way you are in yours. That sounds obvious, but once you really understand it, things start to make sense. That time they forgot your birthday? That moment they brushed off your big news? That conversation where you said something vulnerable and they just moved on? It wasn't personal. It was narrative blindness. You are a background character in their movie. You appear for a scene, maybe a subplot, a few lines of dialogue, but their main story arc is still all about them. This is called the spotlight effect in psychology. We all walk around feeling like a spotlight is shining on us, that people are constantly noticing our mistakes, analyzing our choices, forming judgments about our every move. But the truth, everyone's walking around under their own spotlight, and no one's really looking at you. That sounds depressing, but it's not. In fact, it's one of the most freeing realizations you can have. It means that awkward thing you said, they forgot it an hour later. That time you thought they were judging you, they probably didn't notice that emotional storm you were in while they acted cold. They weren't being cruel, they just didn't see it. People aren't watching your life like a story. They're glancing in between scenes of their own. And once you realize that, you stop expecting too much from them. You stop waiting for everyone to check in on you. You stop feeling betrayed when someone doesn't ask how you're really doing. You stop thinking your value is tied to how often people think about you. Because the truth is they don't. Even the people closest to you have their own battles, their own mental noise, their own inner narrator. Sometimes they'll forget you. Sometimes they'll misunderstand you. Sometimes they'll let you down, not because they don't care, but because they're overwhelmed by their own storyline. This doesn't mean people are selfish. It means they're human. And here's the twist. You're doing it too. Think of all the people you used to know, classmates, coworkers, old friends. You're the main character in your life, but they were just extras. Now reverse that. To them, you were the blurry side character. That's how everyone sees everyone. The average person thinks about themselves 95% of the time, which leaves maybe 5% for everyone else combined. That's not evil. That's how consciousness works. Once you realize this, two things happen. First, you stop over-personalizing other people's behavior. They didn't text back, not because they hate you, but because they're busy, distracted, or lost in their own storm. Second, you stop outsourcing your identity. You stop needing to be seen to feel real. You stop trying to be the perfect friend, partner, child, or colleague just to win a starring role in someone else's life. You realize they're not writing your script, and maybe they never were. And that's where the power comes back to you. Because if you're not the main character in their life, then you finally get to be the main character in your own. You stop waiting to be rescued. You stop trying to be important in everyone's mind. You stop hoping that someone will validate your story just by noticing you enough. You stop performing, and you start living. Not for attention, not for approval, not for applause, but because this is your story, and it's time you stopped playing the side role in it. Most people follow the crowd because it's safer than thinking. We like to believe we're independent thinkers, that our opinions come from reason, that we make choices because they make sense, not because everyone else is doing it. But most people don't think for themselves. They copy what seems safe. We call it fitting in, being realistic, doing what makes sense, but underneath those words is a primitive survival instinct, one older than civilization itself. Belonging means safety. For most of human history, being alone meant death. If your tribe rejected you, you didn't just lose friends, you lost shelter, food, protection. So your brain evolved to see disapproval as danger and agreement as survival. And that wiring still runs the show today, even when the tribe is an office, an online community, or a political movement. This is why conformity feels so natural and independent thinking feels like rebellion. Because deep down, your nervous system isn't asking, "Is this true?" It's asking, "Will this make me safe?" Look around and you'll see it everywhere. People wear what others wear. They speak how others speak. They echo opinions they only half understand, just to avoid being the one who doesn't get it. It's not stupidity, it's self-protection. Social psychologist Solomon Asch demonstrated this decades ago in one of the most famous experiments in behavioral science. He gathered participants and asked them to compare line lengths, a simple visual task with an obvious answer. But here's the trick. Everyone in the group except one was an actor told to give the wrong answer. And the result? When everyone else said the wrong line was correct, most participants agreed, even though their eyes told them otherwise. They literally stopped trusting their own perception to stay part of the group. That's the cost of belonging. We'll trade truth for approval, even when we know we're wrong. You see the same pattern on social media today. Someone posts an opinion that feels risky, and people stay silent, not because they disagree, but because they don't want to be next in line for judgment. Or in offices, where employees nod at bad decisions because speaking up feels like career suicide. Or in relationships, where one person hides their real feelings to keep the peace and ends up living in quiet resentment. We call it compromise, but it's often fear in disguise. The irony is that following the crowd doesn't actually make you safer, it just makes you invisible. You disappear into other people's beliefs, other people's choices, other people's approval systems, and over time, you forget how to tell what you really think. This is how people lose themselves, not in one dramatic act of surrender, but in 1,000 small silences. Every time you swallow your opinion, every time you laugh at a joke you hate, every time you agree just to avoid friction, you trade a piece of authenticity for a sense of temporary peace. But that peace doesn't last, because the mind knows when it's pretending. And the tragedy is, most people never realize they were allowed to think differently. True independence isn't loud rebellion. It's quiet awareness, noticing when you're following the crowd without realizing it. It's not about being a contrarian just to stand out. It's about remembering that truth isn't democratic. It doesn't become right because more people voted for it. Most people stay in the crowd because it's comfortable, predictable, familiar. But the ones who step outside it, who risk being misunderstood, criticized, or alone, they're the ones who actually move the crowd. Every idea that changed the world, from science to art to philosophy, began with someone who refused to nod along. And that's the paradox. It's safer to follow the crowd until you realize the crowd isn't going anywhere. You can't heal in the same place that broke you. When you start trying to change your life, the first instinct is to stay where you are and make it better. You tell yourself you can fix it from the inside. The toxic job, the one-sided relationship, the friend group that drains you. You think that if you just communicate better, work harder, forgive more, it'll all start to feel different. But it doesn't. Because the environment that wounded you rarely becomes the one that heals you. Every space, physical or emotional, carries a memory. The house where you constantly felt small remembers it. The office where you were dismissed holds that silence. Even a person can become a location of pain. Being near them pulls you back into the role you played there. The quiet one, the fixer, the one who apologizes first. You might not even notice it happening. You step into that space, and your body remembers before your mind does. The shoulders tense. The voice softens. You become an older version of yourself, the one who tolerated things just to keep the peace. That's because the human brain learns context before content. It links experiences with surroundings. It recognizes patterns faster than logic. So when you go back to the same environment, even with new insight, it triggers the same wiring. You're not weak. You're conditioned. This is why people relapse after progress, why they return to the same arguments, the same routines, the same kind of person who hurt them before. The surroundings whisper the old script, and you start reading from it again, Healing asks for something most people resist: distance, not to run away, but to see clearly. You can't rewrite the story while you're still inside the scene. Think of how a wound heals. You stop touching it. You protect it from the same friction that caused it. Time and oxygen do what your effort cannot. Emotional healing isn't so different. Sometimes you have to leave the room, the friendship, the city, not because you hate it, but because staying keeps you sick. It feels unfair, doesn't it? You invest years trying to make something better, and the answer ends up being to walk away. But healing isn't about fairness, it's about physics. What damages you keeps echoing until you step out of range. People often say, "But I don't want to give up." And they're right, you're not giving up. You're moving on to somewhere growth is possible. Because not all soil can support new roots. Some ground is just too poisoned by old seasons. When you finally leave, you'll notice the air feels different. Your thoughts get louder. The guilt fades, and clarity starts to arrive in fragments. Then one day you realize the weight you carried wasn't the pain, it was the effort to pretend you could heal where you were hurt. You can't. And once you accept that, leaving stops feeling like failure. It starts feeling like recovery. Healing begins the moment you stop trying to change the room that taught you to shrink and start building one where you can finally breathe. Forgiveness doesn't mean they deserve a second chance. There's a strange confusion people carry about forgiveness. We're told it's noble, that forgiving others is what makes us good, wise, mature. But no one tells you what forgiveness actually costs when it's misunderstood. Forgiveness at its core is an internal act. It's the moment you stop carrying someone else's poison inside you. It's not approval, and it's not reconciliation. It's simply the release of the emotional debt, the quiet decision that you're not going to spend the rest of your life bleeding from the same wound. But somewhere along the way, forgiveness became twisted into permission. People started believing that to forgive means to let someone back in, to resume the relationship, to smile, to trust again, to behave as if nothing happened. That isn't forgiveness. That's amnesia. The difference is subtle, but everything depends on it. You can forgive someone and still choose to keep your distance. You can wish them peace without giving them access. You can release the anger without reopening the door that caused it. The mistake comes from confusing peace with reunion. But peace doesn't always live in the same room as the people who hurt you. Sometimes it lives in the distance you keep from them. We often see this in families. Someone crosses a boundary again and again. The other person finally breaks down, forgives, lets them back in, and the pattern repeats. The same cruelty, the same excuses, the same disappointment. Then guilt arrives. If I really forgave them, shouldn't I give them another chance? No. Forgiveness is about your heart. Trust is about their behavior. One is given, the other is earned. You don't rebuild trust with words or promises. You rebuild it with consistent actions over time, actions that prove the story has changed. And if those actions never come, it's not cruel to walk away. It's sane. Psychologists call this boundary confusion, when people believe that being kind means being open. But kindness without boundaries becomes self-betrayal. You start to tolerate pain in the name of love, as if the more you endure, the more spiritual you become. But forgiveness isn't endurance. It's clarity. It's seeing the situation for what it was and saying, I accept that it happened. I accept that it hurt me. I accept that you are who you've shown yourself to be. And now I release myself from the need for it to be different. That's forgiveness, not pretending, not forgetting, not reconciling, but accepting reality so it stops controlling you. Some people will never understand that. They'll call you cold. They'll say you're holding grudges. They'll say real forgiveness means giving people another chance. But that's not forgiveness. That's spiritual blackmail. You're allowed to forgive quietly and move on without announcement. You're allowed to say, I hope you find peace, and still block their number. You're allowed to love people from a distance so wide they can't hurt you again. Because sometimes the most powerful version of forgiveness is simply freedom. It's no longer replaying the story. It's no longer waiting for them to change. It's no longer keeping the door open for someone who's already walked out. Forgiveness is choosing to live free of what they did and remembering that you never have to live through it twice. The clock doesn't care about your excuses. There's a moment everyone experiences, though few admit it. You look up at the clock, and for a split second you realize how indifferent it is to you. It just keeps moving. Steady, cold, unimpressed. That's the thing about time. It doesn't care who's winning, who's struggling, or who's waiting for the right moment. It doesn't pause for healing. It doesn't stretch for potential. It doesn't stop just because you're not ready yet. You can cry, doubt, plan, hesitate, but the seconds keep falling, like water through a crack you can't seal. People think they have time because they feel time. They see the sun rise and set. Birthdays stack up, years blur together, and so they assume time is something they own. But it isn't. It's rented. It's borrowed. And it never renews. You don't lose time the way you lose money or possessions. You spend it, constantly, without awareness, on everything you do and everything you avoid. And the brutal part is, you never know how much you have left. That's why the clock is one of the most honest teachers in the world. It doesn't lie. It doesn't flatter you. It simply asks, every second, what are you doing with me? Most people respond with stories. They say, I'm just waiting for the right time. I'll start when I have more energy. I'll try again once things calm down. But that's not waiting. That's avoidance wearing a polite face. Think of how many times you've delayed something important. The conversation you didn't want to have, the project you said you'd start next month, the trip you swore you'd take when you had the money. Then years pass, and the window quietly closes. The person moves on. The opportunity expires. The version of you that wanted it disappears. And yet you tell yourself it's fine because you still mean to do it. But the clock doesn't care about your intentions. It only measures your actions. There's a psychological reason for this pattern. It's called temporal discounting, the human tendency to value comfort now more than reward later. Your brain is wired to avoid immediate discomfort, even when that avoidance guarantees regret. That's why people procrastinate, even when they know it's irrational. The cost of doing nothing is invisible until it's permanent. Imagine a person who keeps meaning to reconnect with an old friend. They rehearse it in their head for months. I should text them, maybe next week. One morning they wake up, check their phone, and see a message they'll never be able to reply to again. That's how the clock collects its debt, quietly, without drama, one ignored moment at a time. It doesn't punish you with noise. It punishes you with silence. Every day you postpone a meaningful change, something else decays, not always visibly, but certainly. Skills dull, relationships cool, energy fades. The excuses stay the same, but the conditions that made them possible slowly vanish. The clock doesn't care that you were tired. It doesn't care that you meant well. It doesn't care that the timing wasn't perfect. It just moves, indifferent and fair. That might sound harsh, but there's a strange comfort in it too, because if time doesn't care, then you're free. Free to act now. Free to stop waiting for ideal conditions. Free to live without the illusion of control. You'll never feel ready. You'll never get the perfect alignment of mood, energy, courage, and circumstance. That's why most people never begin. They wait for the impossible. But what time teaches, if you're willing to listen, is that you don't have to be ready. You just have to start. Because time rewards motion, not intention. The clock is neutral. You can waste it, or you can use it, but you can't argue with it. And one day, when you look back, you'll see that all the excuses you gave were just small comforts that robbed you of larger ones. So whatever it is you keep postponing, start before the next second passes, because time won't ask permission to leave. It already is. Letting go is harder than holding on. Letting go sounds like something people say at the end of a yoga class. Peaceful, centered, light. But in real life, letting go doesn't feel like floating on a cloud. It feels like ripping your own hands off something that once felt like you. A person, a dream, a version of yourself you thought you had to become. We like to believe that letting go is what you do when you're healed. But most of the time, letting go is what starts the healing. And that's why it feels awful, because holding on, even when it hurts, gives you structure. You know the story. You know your role in it. Even if it's painful, it's familiar. Letting go means stepping into empty space. No guarantees, no replacement, no applause, just you, with nothing but the decision to stop pretending it's still working. Think about it. People stay in relationships long after they've gone emotionally silent, not because they're still in love, but because breaking the routine feels like breaking reality. They cling to careers they hate because the title feels safer than the unknown. They chase an outdated dream, not because they want it anymore, but because admitting they've outgrown it feels like admitting failure. We're told that letting go is weak, that it's giving up. But sometimes, holding on is the real form of giving up your right to change, to grow, to admit that what once served you no longer does. And it's not just about people or jobs or goals. Sometimes what you need to let go of is a belief. The belief that things will get better if you just try harder, that your worth depends on being needed, that you're only lovable if you stay easy, agreeable, convenient. Letting go of those beliefs, that's where the real unraveling starts. Because the moment you loosen your grip, the truth floods in. You were exhausted trying to fix something that didn't want to be fixed. You were scared to admit how long you stayed out of fear. You were more attached to the idea of who someone could be than the reality of who they were. And letting go, it doesn't erase any of that. It just says, I'm ready to stop living in the echo of something that's already ended. Yes, it will feel like loss, because it is. But it's an honest kind of loss. The kind that leaves room for something new. You'll grieve. You'll doubt yourself. You'll have moments where you reach back out, mentally or physically, just to check if maybe you made a mistake. And then slowly, very slowly, you start to breathe differently. You realize you don't miss them as much as you miss the version of you that hoped they'd be different. You don't miss the job, you miss the identity it gave you. You don't miss the old dream, you miss not having to start over. But starting over isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing you've done. Letting go isn't an escape from pain. It's the decision to stop dragging it around and calling it home. The world doesn't owe you anything. It's a strange thing, really. You do everything right, or at least you try. You work hard, you play fair, you show up, you suffer quietly, you wait your turn. And somewhere deep down, you expect that life is keeping score, that eventually the good things will balance out the bad, that the universe is watching and will reward your patience, that your pain somehow earns you a smoother road ahead. But then it doesn't. The opportunity goes to someone less qualified. The kind person gets hurt again. The loudest, most selfish voice gets promoted. And you're left thinking, did I miss a memo? No, you didn't miss anything. The world just isn't built on fairness. It's built on systems, randomness, and momentum. And none of those owe you anything, no matter how hard you've worked or how much you've been through. That sounds harsh. But it's also one of the most freeing things you'll ever realize. Because when you believe the world owes you, you start living like a customer. You expect something in return. You wait. You hold back. You look around and think, when's it my turn? But the world doesn't have a turn system. There's no cosmic ticket counter. No silent ledger balancing all the effort and pain you've carried. Nature doesn't owe the tree shade. The tree grows toward the light. Or it doesn't. That's how reality works. Now, none of this means life is hopeless or cruel. It just means it's indifferent, and that indifference can be either crushing or clarifying, depending on how you respond to it. You can resent it. You can keep expecting that the right people will notice, that fate will eventually reward you, that some invisible force is going to make it all worth it, or you can drop the expectation and start living like no one is coming to save you. Because they're not. It doesn't mean you stop being kind. It means you stop being kind because you expect something back. It doesn't mean you stop working hard. It means you stop waiting for the world to clap for it. This shift is subtle, but life-changing. When you stop believing the world owes you anything, you start taking everything as an opportunity, not an entitlement. You start building your own door instead of waiting for one to open. You stop taking rejection so personally. You stop seeing other people's success as injustice. You stop confusing effort with guarantees. You start to focus on what's in your hands. And what's in your hands is this: the next step, the next decision, the next move. You're not owed clarity. You create it. You're not owed peace. You protect it. You're not owed success. You work for it, or you don't. And either way, the world just keeps spinning. That's not cynicism. It's liberation. Because once you stop expecting life to reward you for existing, you start creating a life worth existing in. You'll waste years waiting for the right moment. You tell yourself it's not time yet. You just need a little more clarity, a little more energy, a little more money, confidence, support, motivation. You're not stalling. You're being strategic, right? But then a month goes by, then a year, and somehow you're still saying the same thing. Soon, not now. But soon. Here's the part we don't like to admit. There is no right moment, not the kind you're waiting for. The idea that life will eventually hand you the perfect conditions where everything aligns and you finally feel ready is a comforting illusion. And it's the illusion that steals people's lives in slow motion. Ask anyone who finally started the thing they'd been avoiding, the business, the move, the conversation, the dream. They almost always say the same thing. I should have done this sooner because the moment wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The truth is, most of what you're waiting for is an emotion. You're waiting to feel less scared, less uncertain, less vulnerable, less exposed. But those feelings don't go away before you start. They go away because you start. Think of the person who wants to leave a job they hate. They wait for the right time. They tell themselves, once I save up a little more, then once this project's over, then maybe after my vacation. And 5 years later, they're still at the same desk, staring at the same wall, slowly dying in a situation they swore was temporary. Or the person who wants to get in shape, but they're waiting for the weather to get better, or a quieter season, or that mythical week when work stress magically disappears. But that week never comes. Because life doesn't create silence, it creates noise, and if you don't act inside the noise, you never act at all. There's a psychological concept called time inconsistency, the idea that your present self and future self are basically strangers. Your present self wants comfort, your future self wants progress. But only one of them gets to make the decision today. So who wins? Usually the one with the stronger emotions, which means comfort almost always wins, until regret takes its place. Because eventually you stop saying, soon. You start saying, it's too late. That's the real cost of waiting for the right moment. You don't just delay your growth, you shrink your window. The opportunity might still be there, but you won't be. Not the same version, not with the same energy, not with the same hunger. And one day you'll look back and realize the version of you that could have done it is gone. So what do? You stop waiting for perfect. You start building ready enough. You take one ugly, awkward, shaky step, and then another, because momentum doesn't come from feeling ready. It comes from refusing to wait any longer. You can be surrounded and still alone. You walk into the room. People are laughing. Music's on. Conversations everywhere. You know at least 10 names. And still, somehow, you feel like a ghost. Everyone sees you, but no one feels you. You're included, but not really with them. You're smiling, but quietly wondering if anyone would notice if you just left. This is one of the loneliest truths in life. You can be surrounded and still feel completely alone. We usually think of loneliness as physical, being by yourself, scrolling at midnight, eating alone. But that's not the real kind. The most painful loneliness isn't when no one's around. It's when people are around, but you're invisible anyway. You're not seen, not understood, not connected. And that kind of loneliness doesn't care how full your calendar is, how many followers you have, or how long you've been in that relationship. It doesn't matter how many group chats you're in. If you don't feel safe enough to be real, you're alone, even in a crowd. This is why people often say they felt most alone inside their own family, or marriage, or friend group they've had since high school, because being in the same room doesn't mean being close. Here's what makes it harder. When you're silently lonely, no one knows to check on you. You're there, you're functioning, you're playing your role. So people assume you're fine. Sometimes you assume you're fine, until that moment when you're surrounded by noise and still feel like you're underwater. There's psychology behind this. Humans are wired not just to be around others, but to feel emotionally mirrored. We want resonance. That feeling of, yes, I get you, and you get me. It's why we light up when someone finally says the thing we've been secretly feeling. It's why one genuine conversation can feel better than a dozen hangouts. But we rarely say it out loud. Hey, I'm lonely, even though I'm not alone, because it sounds ridiculous. Embarrassing even. You don't want to be dramatic. You don't want to seem needy. So you keep showing up, playing your part, and shrinking a little each time. And this is where it gets dangerous. When people feel unseen long enough, they start to disappear by choice. They become quiet in conversations. They stop reaching out. They convince themselves they're just low maintenance. But deep down, they've started to believe a lie that their real self doesn't belong anywhere. The fix isn't more people, it's more honesty. Because most of us are lonelier than we admit, and we're all just waiting for someone to break the spell and say, hey, do you ever feel like you're in the room but not really there? That moment, that cracks the wall. Because once you're seen, even a little, the loneliness doesn't feel permanent anymore. You remember, oh, I'm not weird. I'm just human. And humans don't need crowds. They need connection. So start there. With one person, one deeper question, one real sentence that risks honesty, and one less performance. Because the fastest way to feel alone is to never let anyone see who you really are. The past won't stop repeating until you stop participating. You swear it's different this time. Different job, different city, different partner. You've turned the page, moved on, clean slate. And yet, somehow, the same story starts playing again. Different characters, same ending. You're back in the same kind of conflict. You're attracting the same kind of people. You're reacting in the same patterns you promised yourself you were done with. And you wonder, why does this keep happening to me? But maybe the better question is, what part of me is still saying yes to this? Because here's the truth, no one wants to hear. The past doesn't repeat itself. You repeat it unconsciously, automatically, emotionally, until something inside you decides, enough. We don't repeat the past because we love it. We repeat it because it's familiar. You grew up with emotional distance, and now you find yourself in relationships where love feels distant and hard to reach. You were taught to earn your worth, and now you stay in jobs or friendships that drain you because struggle feels like normalcy. You were ignored when you needed comfort, and now you find yourself being the strong one who never asks for help. And here's the terrifying part. Your nervous system prefers a painful known over an unfamiliar peace. That's why people keep choosing the same emotional environments over and over again. Because their brain believes, at least I know how to survive this. Psychologists call this repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to recreate old dynamics in an attempt to gain control over them. It's why someone who grew up walking on eggshells will often end up in environments where they feel like they're still walking on eggshells, not because they want it, but because it feels like home. And as long as you keep participating, reacting the same way, staying quiet at the same moments, ignoring the same red flags, the cycle continues. It's not fate, it's muscle memory. But here's the shift. The moment you respond differently, even once, the pattern starts to break. You say no faster. You speak the thing you were trained to hide. You set a boundary, even if your voice shakes. You stop reaching back out to someone who's already shown you they can't hold what you give, and at first, it feels wrong. Not because it is wrong, but because it's new, and new doesn't feel like safety yet, but that's how healing starts. Not with a big dramatic goodbye, but with a quiet refusal to keep reenacting the same script. You can't erase your past, but you can stop acting like you owe it your future. Because the past doesn't stop repeating until you stop dancing to its rhythm. And once you do, really do, you realize the story was never forcing itself on you. You were just the only one still turning the page. Most beliefs are just convenient addictions. We like to think we believe things because they're true, that our opinions are based on facts, that our values come from deep thinking, that we arrived at our worldview through reason and honesty. But if you really zoom in, not on what you say you believe, but how you cling to those beliefs, you'll notice something strange. A lot of them feel more like emotional support systems than rational conclusions. Because here's what nobody tells you. Most beliefs aren't about truth. They're about comfort, their habits, crutches, self-soothing stories you've told yourself for so long, they feel like reality. Take the guy who believes nice guys always finish last. It sounds like insight. But watch his life. Every time someone rejects him, that belief gives him relief. It's not his fault. It's the universe being unfair. He doesn't have to change. He just has to keep blaming the system. Convenient, or the person who believes everything happens for a reason. That belief soothes their anxiety. It helps them cope with chaos. But push a little deeper. Ask them what the reason is when something horrific happens, and suddenly the belief gets blurry. Not because it's wrong, but because it was never meant to be tested. It was meant to comfort. Same with people can't change. For someone who's been betrayed, that belief feels like armor. You don't have to trust again. You don't have to try again. You just throw that belief over your pain and keep walking. This is how beliefs become addictions. They help us avoid responsibility. They help us avoid grief. They help us avoid discomfort. And just like any addiction, the signs show up when you try to let go of them. Try suggesting to someone that maybe they're not always the victim, and watch how quickly they get defensive. Try challenging someone's political identity, and suddenly, it's not about facts anymore, it's about survival. You've touched the belief that props up their entire worldview, and pulling it threatens their sense of self. That's not logic, that's panic. Psychologists call this motivated reasoning, the tendency to filter information so it supports what we already want to believe. You remember the facts that make you feel right. You forget the ones that make you uncomfortable. It's why people say they believe in open-mindedness until someone disagrees with them. It's why someone can quote science 1 minute and ignore it the next, depending on what the science says. The truth? Most people aren't looking for truth. They're looking for something that feels true enough to keep them stable, and it works until it doesn't. Because when reality hits hard enough, your comforting belief can't protect you anymore. That's when the cracks show. That's when growth begins. But only if you're willing to ask one brutal question. Do I believe this because it's true, or because I'm afraid of what's true without it? That's where real strength lives. Not in defending your beliefs louder, but in being brave enough to let them evolve. You don't know yourself as well as you think. Most people are walking around with a version of themselves in their head that simply isn't accurate. Ask someone, do you think you're self-aware? Almost everyone will say yes. But when psychologists tested this, they found something shocking. Over 90% of people believe they're self-aware, but only 10–15% actually are. That's not a small gap, that's a canyon. You might think you're calm under pressure until someone cuts you off in traffic and you explode. You might believe you're a good listener, but halfway through a conversation, you're already forming your response. You might say you value honesty, but sugarcoat feedback because you want to be liked. You might think you're spontaneous, but panic the second plans change. So what's going on? The human mind has a strange blind spot. It's incredibly good at rationalizing its own behavior and incredibly bad at recognizing its own patterns. Think about it. If you procrastinate all the time, your brain doesn't say, "I avoid hard tasks because I fear failure and crave dopamine." It says, "I work better under pressure." If you keep dating toxic people, your brain doesn't say, "I'm repeating a childhood dynamic I haven't healed from." It says, "I just have bad luck in love." If you constantly interrupt people, your brain doesn't say, "I need to feel important and struggle with control." It says, "I'm just passionate about the topic." Self-deception is built in. Not because we're liars, but because the truth is uncomfortable. Real self-awareness doesn't come from thinking about yourself more. It comes from observing yourself honestly, noticing your patterns, tracking your choices, asking not, "What do I believe?" but "What does my behavior say I believe?" Do you say family is your top priority but never call them back? Do you tell yourself you're creative but never actually create anything? Do you claim to want change, but resist every opportunity that threatens your routine? The truth is, most people have a resume self and a real self. The resume self is who you think you are. The real self is who shows up when you're tired, stressed, or no one's watching. And that gap between them, that's where all the confusion, frustration, and self-sabotage live. But here's the good news. The moment you start tracking your actions instead of just your intentions, the moment you stop explaining your flaws and start observing them, you begin to close that gap. You start to notice that you interrupt when you feel anxious, that you avoid conflict because you fear rejection, that you chase busyness so you don't have to feel empty. And once you see it, you can start to change it. Not overnight, not all at once, but step by step, from illusion to clarity. Because the biggest myth is that you already know yourself. But the real power comes when you realize you don't and start getting curious. Success is often just well-presented luck. We love the idea that success is earned, that if someone's rich, they must have worked harder. If they're famous, they must be more talented. If they're admired, they must be smarter or more disciplined or somehow different. But peel back the surface of almost any success story, and you'll find something else hiding there. Luck, timing, connections, access, circumstance. Things no one likes to admit, especially the people who benefit from them. Think of your favorite author, the one whose book changed your life. Now ask, how did that manuscript land on the exact desk of the agent who said yes? How many equally good writers never got past the slush pile? Think of that viral YouTuber, or podcast host, or startup founder. Yes, they worked hard, but so did 10,000 others who never made it out of obscurity. Why them? Maybe they launched at the right moment. Maybe their tweet caught the algorithm on a sleepy Sunday night. Maybe their uncle knew a guy. Maybe someone more talented burned out or gave up the week before. Of course, effort matters. So does skill. So does persistence. But when we ignore the role of chance, we build a myth that success is always the result of merit and failure is just laziness or lack of drive. This isn't just false. It's dangerous. It convinces struggling artists they just need to want it more. It turns burnout into a moral failure. It shames people who didn't have the same head start. And it turns privilege invisible. Let's be clear, success is often built on real work and invisible ladders. It's growing up in a zip code with good schools. It's parents who let you fail safely. It's being healthy enough to take risks. It's not having to work 2 jobs while pursuing your dream. It's someone giving you a second chance instead of writing you off. Those details don't show up in a LinkedIn post, but they shape everything. Here's the tricky part. Most people don't even notice the luck they had. Because we tend to remember our hard work and forget our head starts. You remember staying up late, editing videos. You forget your friend who lent you a camera. You remember networking for months. You forget your last name opened the first door. This doesn't mean success is meaningless. It means it's not as moral as we pretend. And once you realize that, it changes how you treat others. You stop judging people for being behind. You start seeing potential instead of pedigree. And maybe, just maybe, you extend a hand instead of a lecture. Because the truth is, a lot of people just needed one lucky break, and a lot of others are still waiting for theirs. Awareness doesn't automatically equal change. You know what you should do. You know you should stop doom scrolling. You know that late-night snack will mess with your sleep. You know you shouldn't text that person back. You know the job is slowly draining your soul, and yet you do it anyway. Why? Because knowing something doesn't mean you'll act on it. And that's one of the most frustrating truths of being human. Self-awareness feels like progress. You read a book about burnout. You nod the whole way through. You finish a podcast about boundaries. You feel inspired. You even have a breakthrough in therapy. It clicks. You get it. But a week later, nothing's changed. You're still exhausted. Still people-pleasing. Still replaying the same emotional loops. It's not because you're lazy. It's not because you don't care. It's because insight is not a switch. It's a flashlight. It shows you what needs to be done. But it doesn't do the lifting for you. Change, real change, takes repetition, effort, discomfort, and most painfully of all, it takes acting differently before you feel ready. You don't suddenly feel confident and then set boundaries. You set boundaries while still shaking. You don't stop caring about someone toxic and then walk away. You walk away while it still hurts. You don't wait to feel calm before quitting your job. You take the leap while your stomach is in knots. This is what makes change so difficult. It demands action before emotion catches up. And that's why people get stuck in what psychologists call the insight-action gap. It's the space between knowing what needs to change and actually changing it. This is where most personal growth dies, not from ignorance, but from paralysis. We confuse understanding with transformation. We think journaling about our trauma is the same as healing it. We believe talking about goals is the same as working toward them. We assume being aware of our patterns means we've outgrown them, but behavior doesn't shift because you noticed a problem. It shifts because you practice something different. Tiny actions, repeated, through discomfort. That's what rewires a pattern, not epiphanies. So here's the harsh reality. You can go to therapy for years and still avoid vulnerability. You can read hundreds of books and never set a boundary. You can understand every trigger you have and still lash out the same way. Awareness opens the door, but change, that's walking through it. You can be right and still lose. It's one of the first lessons they don't teach you in school. Being right doesn't guarantee anything. Not respect, not victory, not even justice. Because the world doesn't always reward truth. It rewards persuasion, timing, audience, power dynamics. You can have every fact lined up. You can be morally correct. You can defend yourself with logic and evidence and still walk away the loser. Not because you were wrong, but because the situation didn't care. Let's take an argument. You're in a meeting. Someone misrepresents your idea. You calmly explain what you actually meant. You're articulate, precise, fair. They interrupt. Talk louder. They twist your words. Throw in some sarcasm. And the room laughs. Not with you. You're right, but you just lost. Or think about relationships. You catch someone lying. You bring receipts, messages, screenshots. They deflect, cry, Change the subject, and somehow, you end up apologizing. You're right, but you still feel like the bad guy. Here's the brutal truth. The truth doesn't defend itself. It needs strategy, delivery, and sometimes silence. Because trying to prove you're right in the wrong context is like arguing physics with a hurricane. You can explain gravity all day. It won't stop the wind from flattening your house. This doesn't mean you should stop standing up for truth. But it does mean you have to stop expecting it to win by default, because truth is not a weapon. It's a tool, and if you use it wrong, it can backfire. Sometimes being right means knowing when to speak and when it's better to walk away. Sometimes it means realizing that no amount of evidence will change someone who's committed to misunderstanding you. And sometimes it means swallowing your pride, not because you're wrong, but because the fight is costing you peace, sleep, or your sanity. The courtroom doesn't always favor the truth. Social media doesn't always uplift accuracy. People don't always reward honesty. And if you base your self-worth on being right, you'll spend your life bruised, bitter, and exhausted. The real skill? Knowing when your energy is better spent elsewhere. Knowing that internal clarity matters more than external validation. And realizing that some people will never say, "You were right," even when they know it. Let them go. Let it be. Because at the end of the day, truth isn't about winning. It's about not betraying yourself, even when the world gets it wrong. Happiness isn't a goal. If you ask people what they want out of life, most will say some version of the same thing. I just want to be happy. And that sounds reasonable, beautiful, even. But here's the twist. The more you chase happiness directly, the more it slips through your fingers. It's like trying to fall asleep by trying to fall asleep. The more you focus on it, am I happy now? Is this it? The more anxious and restless you become. Because happiness isn't a destination. It's a byproduct. It's what happens when other things are going right, when you're learning something meaningful, doing something challenging, or connecting with people you trust. It sneaks up on you while you're living. But most people treat it like a prize to be won. They build 5-year plans around it. They buy self-help books with titles like How to Be Happy in 10 Steps. They scroll through Instagram looking for evidence that other people have figured it out. And then they wonder why they feel worse. Let's take an example. You hate your job. It drains you. It bores you. You wake up every day with that quiet ooh in your chest. So you say, "I'm quitting to pursue happiness." You leave. You sleep in. You go on a vacation. You post a smiling photo with the caption, "Doing what makes me happy." But a few weeks later, the feeling returns. Restlessness, discomfort, emptiness. Because you were trying to feel good, not to do anything meaningful. And that's where the trap lives. Happiness isn't about feeling good all the time. It's about doing something worth feeling good about. That might be hard. It might involve stress, frustration, even fear. Think about raising a child, building a business, learning a language, healing from trauma. None of those are fun all the time, but they bring depth, growth. And yes, happiness, but only as a side effect of effort. The most consistently happy people, they don't think about happiness all day. They're busy. They're building something, volunteering, training, teaching, creating. They're engaged in life, not standing outside of it, wondering when happiness will arrive like a pizza delivery. And here's the ironic part. The people who obsess over happiness tend to be the most miserable because they treat every normal, boring, or difficult moment as a personal failure. But life isn't supposed to feel amazing all the time. Sometimes it's slow. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's Tuesday, and you're just tired. That's not a problem. That's reality. The problem is expecting constant happiness and then pathologizing your own humanity when it doesn't show up. So what should you aim for instead? Meaning, growth, connection, challenge, contribution. Because when you build a life around those things, happiness starts showing up uninvited, like a friend who drops by while you're busy doing something you love. You don't need closure. We've all been there. A relationship ends, a friendship dissolves, a job lets you go without warning. And you're left staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m. thinking, I just need closure. It sounds noble, mature, emotionally responsible. But let's be honest. Most of the time when we say we want closure, what we really want is a better ending. We want the other person to admit they were wrong. We want answers that feel satisfying. We want a sense of fairness, justice, maybe even a little regret on their part. But life doesn't work like that. People ghost you. Bosses send cold one-line emails. Friends fade away without a fight. Sometimes you never find out what really happened, and that uncertainty becomes a wound you keep picking at, so you replay it. You overthink. You write texts you never send. You fantasize about the perfect confrontation. You think, if I could just talk to them one more time, I'd finally understand. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You probably wouldn't. Because the problem isn't lack of answers, it's that the chapter didn't end on your terms. That's where distance comes in. Not just physical space, mental space, emotional detachment. The ability to stop looking to someone else for a story you can live with and start writing your own. Think about this. Imagine you're watching a movie. Halfway through, the film glitches. The screen goes black. You never see the ending. No closure. Do you stay in the theater for the next 5 years, hoping the screen will turn back on? No. You leave. You get annoyed. You maybe complain about it to your friend, and then you move on with your life. But when it's a person, we treat it differently. We assume the missing ending is our fault. We think we need their words, their explanation, their permission to feel peace. But what you really need isn't more conversation. You need separation from the addiction to understanding. You don't need to know why they changed. You don't need their apology. You don't need their version of the story. You need to stop standing in the emotional doorway, hoping they'll walk back in and hand you a script. Here's a concrete example. Someone breaks your heart. You ask why. They say something vague, like it's not you, it's me. You obsess over it. You analyze every interaction, every silence, every comma in their last text. You think closure will come if you can just figure it out. But even if they gave you a perfect TED Talk about their feelings, it wouldn't heal the pain, because pain isn't logic. And closure isn't found in them. It's built in you, and that happens with distance, not just time, but perspective. The kind that comes from focusing on your life, not their explanation. From creating new habits, relationships, and routines that don't orbit around the ghost of a missing answer. Because one day, you'll wake up and you won't care what they would have said. You'll stop rehearsing speeches. You'll stop checking who watched your stories. You'll stop needing the ending because you'll be too busy living your next beginning. That's closure. And it never comes from them. It comes from you walking away and not turning around. Talent without timing dies quietly. We love to believe the world is a meritocracy, that talent rises. Genius gets discovered. If you're good enough, someone will notice. But that's a dangerous fantasy, because history is filled with people who were brilliant, but invisible, ahead of their time, misplaced, ignored. Not because they weren't good enough, but because they showed up before the world was ready. Talent without timing dies quietly. Let's get specific. In 1827, a man named George Ohm, a physicist, published a paper explaining how electrical resistance worked. It was foundational. Every electrical circuit today is based on his work. And it was mocked. The German education ministry called it a tissue of fantasy, and Ohm had to resign from his teaching job. He spent years in obscurity. Only decades later, after others rediscovered his equations, was he recognized. Now we call it Ohm's law. But during his lifetime, ignored. Same with Ignaz Semmelweis, the Hungarian doctor in the 1840s who figured out doctors were spreading deadly infections by not washing their hands between surgeries and autopsies. He begged hospitals to adopt hand washing with antiseptic. They laughed at him. He died in a mental asylum, institutionalized and disgraced. Today, he's considered the father of antiseptic procedure. But back then, wrong place, wrong time. And it's not just in science. Emily Dickinson, now one of the most celebrated poets in American literature, had fewer than a dozen poems published while she was alive, most of them edited to remove her unique style. Because her voice didn't match the literary norms of the time, she wasn't marketable, not publishable, not right for now. That's the brutal truth. The world doesn't just require talent. It requires timing. You don't just need to be right. You need to be right when people are ready to hear it. It's not fair, but it's real. This applies outside of history too. You might have a brilliant business idea, but if the market's not ready, it'll flop. You might have deep insight in a relationship, but if the other person isn't in a place to listen, it won't matter. You might be ready to lead, but the system still sees you as a junior. That doesn't mean your talent is worthless. It means timing is a hidden multiplier. The best ideas often fail the first time, not because they were wrong, but because they were early. Ask anyone in tech. Google wasn't the first search engine. Facebook wasn't the first social network. The iPod wasn't the first MP3 player. They were just right when the world was ready to care. So what do you do with this truth? Two things. First, don't mistake failure for lack of talent. Sometimes the world isn't ready for what you have to offer. That doesn't mean it never will be. Second, pay attention to context. Not everything needs to be rushed to the stage. Sometimes the smartest move is strategic patience or testing, or finding the right audience instead of yelling at the wrong one. Talent matters, but talent alone doesn't win. Talent plus timing, that's where revolutions happen. Self-delusion feels like peace. It's 11 p.m. You're lying in bed, scrolling through your phone, convincing yourself that tomorrow you'll wake up early and be productive. You know you won't. But you let yourself believe it, just for the peace of it. That's self-delusion. And it's not always dramatic. It often sounds like comfort. I'll start saving next month. She still cares, she's just busy. My job isn't that bad. They probably didn't mean it. I'm totally fine. These are the stories we tell ourselves, not because they're true, but because they help us sleep. Let's be clear. Self-delusion isn't stupidity. It's a survival tool. Your brain doesn't just seek truth, it seeks safety. And often, reality doesn't feel safe. So the mind does what it's good at. It edits the story. It filters facts. It avoids confrontation. It minimizes discomfort. It protects your current identity, even if that identity is built on a lie. Consider a concrete example. A man stays in a toxic job for years, telling himself, it's stable, it pays well, I should be grateful. But deep down, he knows it's killing his motivation. He's burned out, undervalued. Still, he stays, because facing the truth would require change, risk, uncertainty, or take someone in a failing relationship. All the signs are there: distance, disrespect, decay. But they hold on, saying, we've been through so much. It's just a rough patch, because admitting it's over would mean letting go of a future they built in their head. Self-delusion offers peace in the short term, but long term it costs everything. You delay decisions. You justify unhealthy patterns. You stay in places that no longer fit, hoping they'll start to feel right again. And the longer you do, the more your identity warps to match the story you're clinging to. There's a term in psychology for this: cognitive dissonance. It's the mental discomfort we feel when our beliefs and actions don't match. Instead of changing our actions, we often change the narrative to reduce the discomfort. I didn't want that promotion anyway. They probably didn't invite me because they thought I was busy. She didn't cheat. we were on a break. It's not always conscious. Sometimes it's invisible, until one day it isn't. One small crack in the story, one comment you can't unhear, one moment of silence that feels too loud, and suddenly the peace collapses. Because the truth doesn't go away. It waits, and when it returns, it brings the full weight of everything you've been avoiding. That's when people break down. Not from one traumatic event, but from the slow collapse of a carefully maintained illusion. So what's the alternative? Not brutal honesty for its own sake. Not forcing yourself to confront every fear at once, but building the muscle of honesty in small doses. Asking, what story am I telling myself right now? What am I afraid would happen if I stopped believing it? If a friend said this to me, would I believe them? Because truth isn't just an idea, it's a practice. And the more you practice facing it, the less terrifying it becomes. Self-delusion feels like peace. But real peace? That's what you find when the story matches reality and you're finally strong enough to live in it. Not everyone deserves a seat at your table. Imagine you host a dinner. You cook for hours, clean the house, set the table, and light candles. It's intimate, not a buffet. You've only got so many chairs. Now imagine someone barges in uninvited. They insult the food, critique the decor, demand the best seat, and when they leave, they take your silverware. You wouldn't keep inviting them back, would you? But people do this emotionally all the time. They allow critics, manipulators, and emotional freeloaders into their most personal spaces, not physically, but mentally. Their table, their attention, energy, time gets occupied by people who drain rather than nourish. Why? Because we're taught that being kind means being available. That being loving means being endlessly forgiving. That drawing boundaries is selfish. But here's the truth. Your emotional table has limited seats, and some people, they just come for the food. They don't contribute, they don't listen, they don't grow, they just consume. Think about the conversations you leave feeling worse. The ones where your achievements are minimized, your concerns dismissed, your time taken for granted. Now ask yourself, why are they still at your table? Because they've been there for years. Because they're family? Because you're afraid of being rude? Imagine if restaurants ran like that. Someone causes a scene every time they come in, and the manager says, well, they've been a customer for years. They'd go out of business. Boundaries are not rejection. They are architecture. They define who has access to your time, your thoughts, your heart, and on what terms. You're not a public bench. You're a limited reservation. And people earn their seat by how they treat you, not just when it's easy, but when it's inconvenient. Look at your social circle. Do they listen? Do they show up when it doesn't benefit them? Do they respect your time, your growth, your changes? If the answer is no, it's not cruel to step back. It's honest. Because here's the thing about emotional seating. When the wrong people take up space, the right people can't find a seat. You'll spend so much energy managing drama, decoding passive aggression, repairing what they break, that the people who actually see you, support you, challenge you to grow, they'll walk by thinking you're already full. You're not here to accommodate everyone. Not everyone is meant to stay. Some were only supposed to teach you what you won't accept again. The more clearly you define your table, the more deeply you nourish the ones who deserve to be there. And in time, you realize you don't need a crowd, you just need company that doesn't make you question your own worth after they leave. You think you've been consistent. There's a strange thing that happens when you look back at your own life. You feel like you've always been you, same personality, same values, same sense of self. But that's not quite true. Open your old social media posts. Read messages you wrote 5 years ago. Look at the clothes you wore, the opinions you held, the things you were certain about. It's like meeting a ghost, someone who looks like you, sounds like you, but clearly isn't you anymore. And yet, at every point along that journey, you probably thought, this is who I really am. Welcome to the illusion of consistency. Psychologists call it the narrative self. It's the story your brain tells to stitch together your messy, evolving experiences into a single, coherent identity. But the stitching hides the seams. You change more than you notice because your mind quietly updates the script as you go, pretending the story was always headed in this direction. It's like editing chapter 1 of a novel after writing chapter 10, so the whole thing feels intentional. But life doesn't work that way. Most of it is improvisation. Let's get specific. Maybe today you see yourself as confident, but 5 years ago you were anxious in social settings. You've forgotten how much effort it took to unlearn that. So now, when someone else struggles with the same thing, you think, why can't they just be more confident? Or you say, I've always been passionate about learning. But did you really always read books for fun? Or was that a habit you developed after a painful wake-up call? This isn't hypocrisy, it's humanity, but it's dangerous when we forget how much we've changed. Because then you expect others to evolve instantly. You judge past versions of yourself with present standards. And you cling to outdated beliefs just to protect the illusion that you've always known better. The brain is clever like that. It doesn't like contradiction. So when your identity shifts, it rewrites the past to match. You don't remember changing your mind. You remember always being right. But when you zoom out, it's obvious. Your personality is not a statue. It's a river, sometimes calm, sometimes raging, always moving. And the more honest you are about that, the more grace you give yourself and others. You realize that friends grow apart, not because someone did something wrong, but because they stopped evolving in sync. You understand that the job you once loved might not fit the person you've become. You accept that it's okay to change your opinion when new evidence shows up. It doesn't make you a flip-flopper, it makes you alive. Here's the twist. Even the you reading this right now will look different in 5 years. Wiser, hopefully. Maybe more patient. Maybe a little embarrassed by what you believe today. That's not a flaw. That's the point. The only real mistake is pretending you've always had it figured out, because then you stop figuring things out. Growth isn't about perfect consistency. It's about conscious direction. So if you want to live honestly, stop trying to be the same. Start trying to be aware. That's the only version of consistency that actually matters. You'll miss your life while it's happening. There's a strange kind of time travel that happens in your brain. You're physically here, doing something, eating, walking, talking, but mentally, you're somewhere else, replaying a conversation from 2 days ago, worrying about something next week, making up a scene that may never happen. And what gets missed? This moment. The one you'll later wish you had paid attention to. Ask anyone who's lost someone suddenly. Ask a parent whose child just left for college. Ask a friend flipping through old photos they forgot they even took. They'll all say some version of the same thing. I didn't realize how important that moment was while I was in it. Not because they didn't care, but because life doesn't feel like life when you're living it. It just feels normal. Until it doesn't. There's an old saying, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. But it's also true that we live more in imagination than in reality, especially now. Scroll through a concert crowd. Half the people are recording the show instead of watching it. Go to dinner. One person is checking email. Another is thinking about tomorrow's to-do list. You're here, but your mind is 5 tabs open, 2 days ahead. And here's the hard part. You won't know what you missed until it's already gone. Like when your kid randomly runs up and hugs you and you half listen because you're reading a text. Or when you're on vacation, but you're still checking Slack and pretending you're not. It doesn't feel like anything is lost in that moment, but later it shows up as regret. You think you'll remember the big things, graduations, weddings, funerals, and you will. But it's the in-between that makes a life. The late-night talks, the long walks with no destination, the dumb inside jokes, the silence that didn't need to be filled. Those are the memories you don't plan. They just happen. unless you're too distracted to notice. Let's get concrete. You think you're building a life, but what you're really building is a past. Brick by brick, and every moment you ignore, that's a brick missing. You'll look back one day and realize you had everything, but you were too busy scrolling, planning, worrying to see it. You won't remember what email you sent, but you'll remember the look on someone's face when you finally gave them your full attention. You won't remember what was trending, but you'll remember how it felt to be truly present, just once, during an ordinary day that turned out to be unforgettable. So here's the brutal truth. Your life is happening right now. Not next year, not after the promotion, not when things calm down. Now, and it will end one day, gradually or suddenly, whether you were paying attention or not. You don't have to meditate for 3 hours. Just look up. Put the phone down. Breathe. Notice something small, because today's background noise is tomorrow's nostalgia. Don't wait until life feels meaningful to start noticing it. It becomes meaningful because you noticed it. Most apologies are just reputation repairs. You ever get one of those apologies that just doesn't land? Like someone says, "I'm sorry," but somehow it feels more like a strategy than a sentence. It's not in your head. A lot of apologies aren't really about you at all. They're about them trying to save face. Picture this. You're in a group project. You've done the heavy lifting, research, writing, organizing, and then one of your teammates presents it like they led the whole thing. In the moment, you're too stunned to call it out. Afterwards, they shoot you a quick message. "Hey, sorry if I came off like I was taking credit. Wasn't my intention." That's not an apology. That's a reputation move. If they really meant it, they wouldn't wait until after they benefited. They'd stop mid-presentation and give you credit. Or say something real like, "I messed up. I should have acknowledged your work. I get why you're upset." But that's rare, because most people aren't apologizing to repair the damage. They're apologizing to protect how they're seen. You'll see it in relationships too. Someone ghosts you for weeks, then sends a casual, "Sorry, I've been distant. Things have been crazy." That's not taking responsibility. That's checking a box so they can slide back in without consequences. Sometimes people don't even realize they're doing it. We grow up learning that "I'm sorry" is the reset button. Say it, and everything goes back to normal. We learn to say it quickly, often, but not deeply, not honestly. A real apology. It's uncomfortable. It names what happened. It doesn't dance around it with "sorry if" or "sorry you felt." It shows up with specifics, and it doesn't expect you to immediately say, "It's okay." You know when an apology is real because it makes the person feel a little exposed. They're not trying to be seen as good. They're trying to be better. Here's the difference, and you've probably felt it. Fake apology, vague, rushed, and timed to avoid backlash. Real apology, specific, thoughtful, and timed to repair, not just reset. Let's go public for a second. Years ago, a major airline got caught violently removing a passenger from an overbooked flight. Their CEO's first response? "We apologize for having to reaccommodate customers." Reaccommodate? That's PR spin, dressed as regret. Only after public outrage did they finally issue a real statement. Too late. Damage done. Now compare that to when Tylenol had a poisoning scare in the 80s. They immediately pulled millions of bottles off shelves, even though the tampering happened after distribution. They took full responsibility for consumer safety. That's not just damage control, that's character, but you don't need a scandal to see this dynamic. You see it in breakups. You see it when someone says sorry just to make the awkwardness go away. You see it when someone apologizes just enough to be forgiven, but not enough to change. And the painful part, we often accept it because we want to believe they care. We want to believe the words mean something. But sometimes, "I'm sorry" just means I don't want to look like the bad guy. So here's the quiet shift. Start paying attention not to what people say, but when they say it, why, and what happens after. If someone's sorry just long enough to stop the consequences, it's not an apology, it's a tactic. And the moment you start seeing that, you stop confusing guilt with growth. You can't save time, only spend it wisely. We talk about saving time like it's money in a bank. Like if we just cut enough corners, automate enough tasks, or skip a few steps, we'll end up with this magical surplus of hours we can spend however we want later. But here's the problem. Time doesn't work like money. You can't store it. You can't earn interest on it. And once it's gone, it doesn't come back with a refund. Every second is spent. The only difference is what you're spending it on. And whether you noticed, think about your last week. How many hours did you spend scrolling out of habit? How many conversations did you rush through, already halfway somewhere else? How many things did you do that you didn't even choose, but just ended up doing? That's the trickiest part. We don't lose time all at once. We leak it. 10 minutes here, a passive hour there. A day sacrificed to something we didn't even want to do, but felt bad saying no to. And by the time we look up, we're tired, burned out, and somehow still behind. Not because we didn't have enough time, but because we didn't own how we spent it. Let's break this down with something real. Imagine you're handed $24 every morning. You're told you must spend this by midnight. No saving, no borrowing. Whatever's left disappears. You'd probably spend that money with care. You'd think, do I want to blow this on something meaningless? Or invest it in something that actually matters to me? Now translate that to 24 hours. Every day, same rules apply. You don't get rollover hours. You don't get credit. You get today. And what you do with it is what you trade your life for. That sounds heavy, but it's actually freeing. Because once you stop chasing the fantasy of saving time, you can start asking a better question. Is this how I want to spend it? Not is this efficient? Not will this make me look productive? But does this feel worth it, knowing I don't get this hour back? Some of the best uses of time don't look efficient at all. Talking with someone you love, with no goal, just presence, going for a walk without a podcast or a destination. Spending a day making something no one asked you to make, but you care about it. Those aren't hacks, they're choices. The irony is, the more obsessed you are with saving time, the more likely you are to waste it. You rush through dinner to get to emails, only to end up doom scrolling for 2 hours. You multitask everything and remember nothing. You save 5 minutes here and there and lose 5 years to a life that didn't feed you. Here's what people figure out, often too late. You don't need more time. You need fewer things that waste it. And that doesn't mean being hyper-productive. It means being deliberate. You'll never find time. You'll never save it. All you get is the chance to spend it on purpose. And if you don't decide where it goes, someone else will. The mind cares about survival, not truth. You've probably had this moment. Someone shows you evidence that completely contradicts what you believe, and you instantly feel it. Not curiosity. Not openness, but tension, resistance, maybe even a little anger. That's not a flaw in your reasoning. That's your mind doing exactly what it was designed to do. Because truth is not its first priority. Your brain didn't evolve to seek truth. It evolved to keep you alive. And what keeps you alive, at least according to your brain, is what feels familiar. What confirms your identity. What reduces uncertainty. Even if it's wrong, let's make this real. Imagine you grew up being told you're not good enough unless you're constantly achieving something. You internalize that belief, not because it's true, but because it helped you avoid shame. It made you feel accepted, loved maybe, so your brain locks it in. Keep achieving. Stay safe. Now fast forward to adulthood. You're burned out, never satisfied. You keep achieving, but it never feels like enough. That belief, it's not helping anymore. But your brain doesn't care. It remembers that it once kept you safe, and it refuses to let it go. Because to your mind, safety beats truth every time. This shows up everywhere. People don't evaluate new ideas logically. They defend their worldview like it's their home. Because it is. It's the structure their brain built to feel stable. And tearing it down, even when it's made of lies, feels like setting fire to your own shelter. So what do we do instead? We rationalize. We avoid information that contradicts us. We invent explanations after the fact, not to deceive others, but to protect ourselves from panic, shame, or uncertainty. This is why facts often fail. It's why arguments rarely change minds. Because what looks like a reasoning problem is actually a threat detection system working overtime. And it's not just about beliefs. Your patterns, your habits, your fears, they're all shaped by what once kept you safe, even if now they're keeping you stuck. So here's the challenge. If you want to move toward truth, you'll have to override the part of your brain that's just trying to keep things familiar. You'll have to sit in the discomfort of not knowing. You'll have to question the very thoughts that feel most you. That doesn't mean rejecting everything. But it does mean being suspicious of comfort, because comfort often signals survival, not honesty. The mind's job is to protect, but your job is to see clearly, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then. Some people want you to stay broken. It sounds harsh, but some people in your life benefit from your pain, not because they're evil. Not because they wake up thinking, how can I sabotage you today? But because your brokenness fits into their system, and your healing would force them to confront something they don't want to face. Here's what that looks like. You're the people pleaser in your family, always the one who smooths things over, keeps the peace, absorbs the drama. The moment you start setting boundaries, saying no, expressing anger, being honest, you're called difficult, selfish, changed, because your old role, the broken one, served them. It made their lives easier. Or maybe you've always been the mess, the one who couldn't get it together. And there's someone who always swoops in to rescue you with advice, control, judgment dressed up as support. But when you actually start to get better, when you no longer need saving, they get uncomfortable. Why? Because helping you gave them power. It gave them identity. And if you don't need them, they have to face themselves. That's the part no one talks about. Healing isn't just about you. It changes the dynamic around you. And people who were comfortable with the broken version of you won't always clap when you start to grow. Sometimes they'll sabotage it. They'll plant doubt. They'll guilt trip you. They'll act offended that you're changing. And the worst part, it works because you're still healing, still unsure, still building the foundation of a new self while standing in the ruins of the old one. It's incredibly easy to slide back into dysfunction just to keep the peace. But here's what you need to understand. Not everyone who says they care about you wants you to be free. They want you to be predictable, to play the part they're used to keep their story of you intact, because changing that would force them to rewrite their own. It doesn't make them villains. It just means you have to be careful who you bring on your healing journey. Some people aren't safe for your growth. So what can you do? First, notice the patterns. Who gets distant when you succeed? Who makes you feel guilty when you protect your time? Who keeps pulling you back into roles you've outgrown? Second, remind yourself, you don't need permission to get better. You don't owe anyone the version of you that made them comfortable. And third, maybe hardest of all, accept that growth sometimes means letting go, not with anger, not with blame. Just with quiet clarity. I'm no longer willing to stay small to make someone else feel big, because healing doesn't just fix what's broken, it reveals who was benefiting from your wounds. And once you see that, it's hard to unsee. You're being manipulated, and you like it. If you think manipulation only happens in shady backroom deals or toxic relationships, think again. It happens every time you scroll. Every time you feel the urge to check a notification. Every time you click something without really knowing why. And the disturbing part? You're not resisting. You're participating. Willingly. Let's make this crystal clear. Your brain is a prediction machine. It's wired to seek patterns, rewards, and shortcuts. And the people who design your digital world, social media apps, news feeds, advertisements, know this better than you do. They don't need to force you to do anything. They just nudge you toward outrage, toward insecurity, toward the next click, and you'll think it was your idea. Ever wonder why TikTok videos are so short? Why YouTube autoplays the next thing? Why Instagram shows you just enough likes to keep you checking? It's not random. It's engineered around variable reward schedules, the same psychology used in slot machines. Sometimes you get a hit of dopamine, sometimes you don't, but your brain keeps checking because maybe this time it'll feel good. You are the lab rat, and the maze is fun. This isn't just about apps. It happens in conversations, relationships, even politics. Take guilt, for example. If someone constantly reminds you of everything they've done for you and how ungrateful you've been, they're not trying to connect, they're trying to control. And if you've ever caught yourself changing your behavior just to avoid someone's silent treatment, you've been trained, not persuaded. Here's where it gets trickier. Manipulation often wears the costume of kindness, the compliment that makes you feel indebted, the favor that's followed by a request, the concern that quietly limits your freedom. It feels good, it feels flattering, but it's not free. And that's the key. The most effective manipulation doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like love, or safety, or attention. That's why it works. So how do you spot it? Look for behavior that leaves you confused. Look for moments when you feel responsible for someone else's emotions, even when you've done nothing wrong. Look for patterns where your choices shrink, your freedom erodes, and your energy drains. But you're still saying, it's fine. And ask yourself a brutal question: who benefits when I stay compliant, distracted, or addicted? Because someone always does. This isn't about becoming paranoid or cutting off everyone who influences you. Influence is part of being human. But manipulation starts when someone exploits your blind spots and convinces you to hand over control. And if you're not aware of how that works, you'll end up calling the leash loyalty, the cage comfort, and the silence peace. Worse, you'll defend it. Because manipulation that flatters your ego feels a lot like freedom until it isn't. You are the villain in someone's story. In every dispute, there's always another version of the story. Ask Jordan why she stopped talking to her best friend from college, and she'll say, "We just drifted. I needed space. She was getting too controlling." Ask that friend, and you'll hear, "She abandoned me the moment I was struggling." No warning. Just gone. Two memories. Two narratives. And in one of them, Jordan is the villain. This isn't rare. It's standard. Most people walk around assuming they're the misunderstood hero of their own film. But in someone else's scene, they were the side character who turned toxic halfway through the second act and never showed up for the apology scene. Every person accumulates these roles without realizing it. A former manager thinks of their ex-employee as ungrateful. That employee remembers the manager as manipulative and dismissive. A parent recalls their strictness as protection. The child grew up interpreting it as fear and pressure. Each side tells a version that feels honest, but only from their camera angle. This is where things get interesting. Villains don't usually know they're villains. They're just doing what feels justifiable to them in the moment. A breakup to reclaim peace. A silence to protect mental health. A confrontation that felt overdue and came out too sharp. The effect? Someone else is left carrying that wound, and they remember it differently. Even more striking, the stories we tell about ourselves often quietly erase these roles. We say, "I had to walk away." We don't say, "I disappeared without closure." We say, "They were unstable." We don't say, "I never asked what they were going through." History is always edited, but memory doesn't care about fairness. Entire friendships fracture this way. Two people staring at the same shared past, each convinced the other one burned the bridge. And most of the time, no one's lying. They're just remembering it differently. Here's the twist. Realizing this isn't about guilt, it's about awareness. The more someone recognizes they can be the villain in someone else's memory, the less likely they are to flatten others into one-dimensional antagonists. They start asking better questions. What did that look like from the other side? Was I protecting myself or avoiding discomfort? Am I willing to be honest about the pain I caused, even if I didn't intend it? We don't get to control the roles we've played in other people's stories. But we can become the kind of person who stops assuming their version is the only one that counts. And maybe that's the real arc. Not becoming the perfect protagonist, but being the kind of person who learns to see the whole cast. You will never be fully understood. There's a man in his 60s sitting at a kitchen table, staring at the back of a woman he's known for 40 years. His wife is washing dishes in silence. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't know what to say. Because 10 minutes earlier, in a voice without anger, she said something that broke him. I don't think you've ever really known me. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a bitter way. Just as a quiet fact. And the thing is, he couldn't argue. He couldn't even say she was wrong. Because deep down he realized he didn't know what she wanted anymore. He wasn't sure what she feared, what she hoped for, what she dreamed about when no one was watching. He'd spent decades next to her, but somehow they'd never met in the middle. That's the moment most people never talk about, when you realize that even the people closest to you are mysteries, and worse, so are you. We grow up with this idea that if someone loves us enough, they'll understand us, that they'll get us without us needing to explain. But that's a fantasy. Because real understanding takes more than love. It takes translation, and most of us never learned the language of our own minds, let alone someone else's. Think about it. Have you ever been completely misread by someone? Even when you explained yourself clearly, have you ever tried to describe an experience that shaped you and seen nothing in the other person's eyes? Ever felt alone in a room full of people who know you? That's not rare. That's being human. Because no matter how many words we use, they're just shadows of what we mean. When someone says, I'm fine, it might mean, I'm collapsing. Or I don't think you'd understand anyway. And most of the time, they're right. Nobody else has lived inside your skin. Nobody else heard your father's voice the way you heard it. Nobody else had that one weird school memory that still haunts you when you can't sleep. The smells, the sounds, the small humiliations and private victories that shaped who you are. Most of them have never been told, and maybe never will be. So even if someone listens with all their heart, they're still only hearing echoes. But here's the twist. That doesn't mean you're doomed to be alone. In fact, the people who understand this are often the ones most capable of connection, because they stop demanding perfect understanding. They stop needing others to get it completely before they feel seen, and they start valuing small things. A nod, a phrase, a glance that says, I don't fully understand, but I'm here anyway. And maybe that's what matters more. The man at the kitchen table didn't say anything that night. But a few weeks later, he sat down with her and asked a question he hadn't asked in years. What have you been carrying that I haven't seen? Not to fix her, not to explain himself, just to listen. Really listen. It wasn't perfect. It didn't solve everything, but it opened a door. And maybe that's as close as we ever get. The past can't be rewritten, only released. In 1971, a man named John List murdered his entire family in cold blood, turned off the lights, wrote a letter to his pastor, and vanished. For 18 years, he disappeared without a trace. He changed his name, started a new life, and tried to pretend none of it ever happened. When he was finally caught in 1989, he looked calm, almost peaceful, like a man who had fully separated himself from what he had done. And when they asked him why, he said something strange. I had to start over. I couldn't see another way. It sounds extreme, but at a smaller scale, many people try to do the same thing. They run from their past, a mistake, a failure, a shameful decision, hoping if they pretend hard enough, it'll disappear. Some change cities, some change names. Others bury memories so deep they don't even feel like memories anymore. They erase photos, cut ties, or invent stories to make everything sound better. But here's the brutal part. The past doesn't disappear. It just waits. You can't edit it. You can't unsay what you said. You can't go back and handle it differently. The hardest truth is this. What happened, happened. But that doesn't mean you're trapped. The goal isn't to rewrite your story, it's to stop fighting it. In psychology, this is called integration. It's the idea that healing doesn't mean erasing pain or pretending it didn't happen. It means facing it directly, understanding it, and then slowly letting it lose its grip on you. Think of it like dragging a heavy suitcase through life. You can try to ignore it. You can pretend you're not carrying it, but you'll still feel the weight. Only when you stop, open it, unpack it, do you get to walk lighter. Some people spend decades arguing with ghosts. They replay old conversations. They imagine what they should have said, what they could have done, what might have been. They get stuck in if only. But there is no time machine. There is only now. And now is the only place you can make peace. That doesn't mean forgetting. It means saying, yes, that happened. Yes, it hurt. But I'm not letting it define me forever. Sometimes releasing the past starts with the smallest action, telling the truth to yourself, not making it prettier, not turning it into a dramatic story. Just seeing it clearly. Then you can begin to live forward instead of backward, because as long as you try to rewrite it, you're trapped in it. But once you release it, you're finally free to write something new. Certainty is often just fear in disguise. Picture this. You're at a dinner with friends. Someone brings up a complicated topic, climate change, politics, artificial intelligence, whatever. One person speaks up with confidence. They say exactly what they believe. No hesitation, full conviction, and even if they're wrong, dangerously wrong, they sound sure. That's the power of certainty. It makes people listen. It makes people trust. But here's the part no one wants to admit. A lot of certainty is just fear dressed up as confidence. Because when the world feels unpredictable, scary, and out of control, our brains want something to grab onto. We want to believe we know, that we're right, that we understand how things work, that we're not lost. So we invent certainty. We cling to beliefs not because they're true, but because they're comforting. Because if we let go of them, we'd have to face how much we don't know. You see this everywhere. A bad relationship ends, and someone immediately says, "They were a narcissist. I knew it." It's easier than sitting in the confusion. What actually happened? What did I miss? Certainty makes it neat, clean, but also shallow. In science, the most dangerous moments often come right after a breakthrough, when researchers think they've figured it out. That's when they stop asking questions. That's when progress slows down. In religion, in politics, in personal relationships, the same thing happens. Certainty replaces curiosity. And curiosity is what keeps us human. The irony is, the people who are truly wise, the ones worth listening to, they often sound unsure. They ask more questions than they answer. Not because they know less, but because they've seen how complex everything really is. The world isn't binary. People aren't all good or all bad. Most issues aren't simple. But pretending they are gives us a rush of safety. It feels like armor until it becomes a cage. Because when you have to be right, when you fear being wrong, you stop learning. And when you stop learning, you stop growing. That's the real danger. So next time someone speaks with unshakable certainty, or you catch yourself doing it, ask, "Am I sure because I know? Or because I'm scared of not knowing?" Letting go of false certainty doesn't make you weak. It makes you brave. Because it means you're willing to live in reality, not just a story that feels good. Peace requires sacrifice, usually of ego. Most people say they want peace. They imagine quiet mornings, fewer arguments, less stress, maybe a bit more time for themselves. But when peace finally comes knocking, they slam the door. Why? Because peace isn't free. It doesn't come wrapped in a soft blanket. It comes with a mirror and asks you to give something up. Usually, it's your ego. Let's say you're in an argument. You know you're right. You have the facts, the screenshots, the receipts, but peace, real peace, means letting go of the need to win. Can you do that? Or imagine a friend constantly disappointing you, always making excuses. You vent, you complain, you rehearse what you'll say next time. But peace might mean cutting the cord, even if it means being seen as cold, or mean even if no one claps for your decision. Because peace often doesn't feel good at first. It feels like discomfort, silence, humility, letting go of control. People crave peace, but they won't sacrifice their pride. They want resolution without surrender. They want calm without boundaries. They want harmony without changing their behavior. But here's the twist. Peace isn't a prize. It's a process. It's choosing not to have the last word. It's stepping away from drama, even when you have the perfect comeback. It's walking away from cycles that feel familiar, but poison you quietly. Think of the person who leaves a toxic job without burning bridges. That's ego surrender. Or the friend who chooses not to gossip, even though they know all the dirt. That's ego surrender. Or the person who forgives someone, not because they deserve it, but because they don't want to carry it anymore. That's ego surrender. And every time you do it, peace moves a little closer. But here's the catch. Your ego will scream. It'll tell you you're weak, that you should fight harder. That silence means losing. That's not truth. That's fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of seeming small. Fear of not being recognized as the one who was right. But what if being right isn't worth the inner noise? What if peace is louder than ego, but only once you learn to listen? It's not glamorous. No one throws you a party for choosing maturity. There's no trophy for walking away quietly. But deep down, you'll feel it. Not immediately, but one morning, weeks or months later, you'll wake up and feel clear. No tension, no mental rehearsals, no regrets, just peace. Not because everything got fixed, but because you stopped needing it to be. And that's when you'll realize peace was never about them. It was always about what you were willing to release. Most problems are emotional, not logical. Imagine this. You're arguing with someone about something simple. Maybe a missed text, a late reply, a forgotten chore. The facts are clear. It should be an easy fix, but it blows up. Voices raise, walls go up. Nothing gets solved. Why? Because the problem wasn't the text or the chore. It was how it felt. It felt like rejection, like being ignored, like not being respected. And here's the thing most people never realize. Most problems look logical, but they live in emotion. Take procrastination. Logically, it makes no sense. You know the deadline is coming. You know it's going to cause stress later. So why not just do it? Because emotionally, it feels heavy. It feels like failure waiting to happen, or boredom, or pressure. So you avoid it. Not because you're lazy, but because your brain is trying to protect you from discomfort, or think about overthinking. You spin in circles about something that already happened. You replay conversations. You imagine 100 scenarios. Logically, you know it's pointless, but emotionally, it gives you a sense of control. You can't change what happened, but maybe if you think hard enough, you can protect yourself from it happening again. Even the way people shop isn't logical. They'll spend hours comparing a $50 gadget, reading reviews, watching YouTube unboxings, then turn around and spend $500 on a spontaneous flight or outfit to feel better. Because the logic isn't running the show. Emotion is, and here's the brutal truth. If you keep trying to solve emotional problems with logic, you'll feel like you're constantly stuck. You'll give someone the perfect advice, and they'll ignore it. You'll make a flawless plan and still sabotage it. You'll know exactly what to do and still not do it, because you haven't dealt with the feeling underneath. Now, this doesn't mean emotions are bad. They're not. They're the oldest part of the brain, the survival system. But they speak a different language. They don't care about spreadsheets. They care about safety, identity, connection. You can't outlogic a fear of failure. You have to notice it, understand it, sometimes even sit with it. Only then can the logic land. This is why therapy helps. Not because it tells you something you didn't already know, but because it gets to the emotional root and lets your nervous system finally relax enough to listen. So next time you're stuck, don't just ask, "What's the smart thing to do?" Ask, "What am I really afraid of here? What emotion am I avoiding? What part of me needs to feel safe first?" That's where the real solution begins. Because once emotion feels seen, logic becomes obvious. You don't escape pain by ignoring it. You just delay it. Let's say your phone starts glitching. You notice it. It's slow, freezes sometimes. But instead of fixing it, you just stop using the apps that crash. You swipe around the issue. Avoid opening certain things. It kind of works, until one day the phone shuts down completely. Now you have to deal with it, and it's worse. That's how emotional pain works. You can ignore it, avoid it, distract yourself. You can scroll, binge, overwork, overshare, say, "I'm fine," with a smile that doesn't reach your eyes. And it might even seem like it works for a while, but the pain doesn't vanish. It waits. People often confuse silence for healing. Just because something hasn't come up in a while doesn't mean it's gone. Pain isn't polite. It doesn't knock. It leaks into your relationships, your habits, your thoughts. Your fuse gets shorter. Your mood swings harder. You get exhausted, but you don't know why. Because part of you is spending energy keeping the pain hidden. The human brain is clever like that. It knows how to tuck things away to keep you functioning. But those hidden things still affect how you see the world. Think about a kid who got ignored whenever they cried. They grow up learning, "My feelings are a problem." So as an adult, they might laugh off real hurt, say it's not a big deal, and bottle it up. But deep down, that pain is still there. And it shows up in arguments, in self-doubt, in why they stay quiet even when something matters. Or imagine someone who never got to grieve. They jump right back into work after a breakup or loss. They act strong. Everyone praises them for being resilient. But months later they feel numb, disconnected. They don't enjoy anything. Because unprocessed pain turns into emotional scar tissue, and scar tissue isn't flexible. Here's the hard truth. You can delay pain, but you can't delete it. And the longer you delay it, the deeper it buries itself, until it turns into something harder to name, like anger, anxiety, burnout, or emptiness. That's why real healing doesn't feel like a spa day. It feels like finally facing what you've been avoiding, letting the sadness rise, letting the anger breathe, letting yourself admit that actually hurt me. That moment, that's where everything begins to shift. Because when pain is faced, it moves. It doesn't stay stuck. It's like a knot that finally loosens once you stop pretending it's not there. And the best part, what comes after is lighter, more real. You're not using energy to fake it anymore. So, no, you don't escape pain by ignoring it. You just delay it. And when you're ready to stop running, you'll find that facing it hurts less than carrying it. You will miss out on things that matter. You just will. Modern life sells an illusion that with the right tools, the right mindset, the right strategy, you can have it all. All the experiences, all the opportunities, all the connections, all at once, forever. But that's not how reality works. Every choice you make costs you something else. Say yes to the job across the country. You miss the slow years with your parents. Choose stability. You miss the chaos of risk that might have paid off. Pick one partner. You close the door on every alternate version of love you'll never know. And here's the uncomfortable part. Even when you choose right, you still lose. There's no life where you do everything, where you attend every wedding, chase every dream, nurture every friendship, make every right call. There's no master plan that eliminates regret, because living means missing out. Think about it. For every person you date, there are millions you never meet. For every path you take, there are thousands you'll never see again. Even just scrolling through social media, every reel you enjoy is another you'll never watch. And the longer you live, the more you'll notice the ghosts of the unlived life. The what-ifs. The version of you that studied music instead of medicine, or stayed in that city one more year, or called them back. Some of these things you'll grieve. Not because you failed, but because there was simply no way to do it all. This isn't something to solve. It's something to accept. Missing out isn't a glitch in the system. It is the system. The only alternative is numbness, paralyzing yourself with indecision so you never lose anything, but also never truly live. So instead of chasing the fantasy of total experience, start chasing meaningful ones. Instead of fearing missed opportunities, focus on the ones that matter to you. Not the ones that get applause or likes or validation, the ones that fit your soul. And when the FOMO creeps in, when you feel that sting of paths not taken, don't panic. That feeling doesn't mean you're doing life wrong. It means you're actually living it. Many relationships are just emotional transactions. Not every relationship in your life is built on love. Some are built on needs, some on fears. And many, more than you think, are just emotional transactions. That sounds harsh. But think about it. A friend who only calls when they're going through a breakup. A relative who checks in just before asking for money. A coworker who's warm and friendly until the promotion's gone. A partner who showers you with love, as long as you don't challenge them. These are not rare exceptions. They are part of the human condition. Because when we're not conscious of it, we treat relationships like exchanges. I'll listen to your problems if you praise me. I'll be there for you if you never criticize me. I'll love you, but only if you stay exactly the version of yourself that benefits me. It's subtle. It's rarely spoken aloud. But it shapes everything. Even kindness can become currency. Even vulnerability can become leverage. We learn this early. A child learns to be the easy one to get approval. A teen hides their true thoughts to stay in the group. An adult stays quiet at dinner to keep the peace, even if it costs them dignity. And over time, we mistake these silent bargains for connection. But here's how you know something's off. You leave the interaction feeling drained, not seen. You walk on eggshells. You measure your words. You can't be the you are when you're alone. Because deep down, the unspoken contract is clear. Be useful or be excluded. Now, this doesn't mean every relationship must be deep or lifelong. But when most of your relationships are transactional, something gets lost. Your energy becomes a commodity. Your truth becomes a liability. And slowly, you forget what real connection feels like, the kind that doesn't keep score. So what's the alternative? Start by paying attention to how you feel in someone's presence. If being honest feels dangerous, that's not connection, that's performance. If love feels like a reward you have to earn, it's not love, it's control. Look for the ones who make room for your full humanity, the ones who still see you when you're not useful, not perfect, not pleasing, and more importantly, be that person for someone else. Because the real currency of meaningful connection isn't usefulness. It's presence, it's truth. It's the silent agreement that says, you don't owe me anything. I'm just here with you, for real. You don't need everyone to understand you. One of the quietest prisons in the world is the need to be understood by everyone. It starts early. You try to explain why you're upset, and someone tells you you're too sensitive. You share an idea you're excited about, and you're met with blank stares, so you try again. You reword it. You defend it. You search for the right metaphor, the perfect example, the tone that won't sound too much. But here's the truth. No matter how perfectly you explain yourself, some people still won't get it. And it's not because you're bad at communicating. It's because some people aren't listening to understand. They're listening to confirm what they already believe about you. The need to be understood by everyone is exhausting. It forces you to constantly translate yourself into versions that are easier to digest. And each time you do, something gets lost. You water down your personality so you're not too intense. You hide your hobbies so you're not too weird. You suppress your doubts so you're not too negative. You act like you don't care so you're not too emotional. And what's left? A version of you that's easier for others, but unrecognizable to yourself. We live in a world where misunderstanding can feel like rejection, but they're not the same. Sometimes, someone's inability to understand you says more about their limits than yours. Maybe they've never been where you've been. Maybe your worldview threatens theirs. Maybe they're just not ready, and maybe they never will be. And that has to be okay, because if you spend your life trying to be understood by everyone, you'll never get to be who you actually are. You'll shrink, edit, and perform until the real you is buried under 1,000 masks. But once you let go of that pressure, something surprising happens. You start speaking more freely, not to convince, but to express. You stop rehearsing your opinions because you don't need them to land with everyone. You find people who don't just tolerate your weirdness, they resonate with it. And here's the secret. The people who truly understand you won't need much explanation. They'll just get it. Not everything, not always, but enough. Enough to make you feel safe. Enough to remind you that clarity doesn't require a crowd, just a few real connections. So instead of exhausting yourself trying to make everyone understand, focus on being understandable to yourself. Say what you mean. Stand by it. Be clear, not performative. The people who matter will meet you there. The rest, let them misunderstand. The longer you avoid responsibility, the heavier it gets. There's a strange kind of weight that doesn't feel heavy at first. It begins with small things, a message you don't reply to, a task you keep putting off, a truth you avoid because facing it would mean change. At first, it feels harmless. Life goes on. No one notices, and you tell yourself, I'll deal with it later, but later never comes clean. It comes carrying interest. The message you didn't send, now it's awkward. The task you avoided, now it's urgent. The truth you ignored, now it's grown sharp edges, and it's chasing you. Avoided responsibilities don't just sit quietly in the corner, they multiply. They whisper at you while you try to relax. They tint your joy with guilt. They turn rest into restlessness. And over time, the weight grows, not because the task got bigger, but because you trained yourself to fear it. Think about a student who doesn't open their email for a few days, then weeks. Eventually, the idea of checking it becomes terrifying, not because the inbox is cursed, but because they've built a story in their head about how bad it might be. And that imagined fear is heavier than any actual email could be. Responsibility, when faced, is often lighter than we expect. It takes effort. Yes, sometimes a lot, but effort is a one-time payment. Avoidance is a subscription, and it costs more than time. It costs you trust. It costs you self-respect. It costs you peace. The longer you avoid it, the more it starts to define you. You're no longer just someone who missed a deadline. You're bad with deadlines. Not someone who hasn't had that conversation, someone who avoids confrontation. It starts shaping your identity in ways you never meant. But here's the good news. Responsibility is still yours. You can pick it up anytime. And once you do, something surprising happens. That giant monster in your head, it shrinks. That conversation you feared, It's over faster than you imagined. That guilt that haunted you, it loses its grip. Because action clears what avoidance clouds, it doesn't mean you'll handle everything perfectly. You'll mess up. You'll be late. You'll drop balls. But facing it, that's the part that strengthens you. That's where self-respect is built. The weight doesn't come from responsibility itself. It comes from delay, denial, deflection. And every moment you carry it adds more bricks. So take a breath. Pick one thing. Face it. Not because you have to prove anything, but because carrying unclaimed weight is the slowest way to sink. You'll defend the cage that feels like home. There's a story about a tiger that spent most of its life in a circus. Every day it was kept in a tiny cage, 8 feet long, 4 feet wide. After years of training, the tiger learned to pace in circles, the same 12 steps over and over again. Then one day rescuers took it to a wildlife sanctuary. They opened the door. The tiger stepped out, looked around, and kept pacing. 12 steps. Turn. 12 steps. Turn. No bars anymore, but the cage was still there in its mind. People aren't that different. We like to think we want freedom, but freedom can be terrifying. It means uncertainty, risk, responsibility. So instead, we stay in cages that feel familiar, cages we can complain about but still predict. A bad relationship that isn't that bad, a job that drains you but pays the bills, a routine that leaves you numb, but at least it's stable. That's how mental cages work. They trick you into calling survival comfort, and when someone tries to open the door to show you there's more out there, your first instinct isn't gratitude. It's defense. You explain why you can't leave yet, why this is fine for now, why people who chase freedom are unrealistic. You start defending the very thing that's been holding you. Because the unknown feels more dangerous than the familiar pain you already understand. The brain is wired for stability. Psychologists call this homeostasis, our natural tendency to keep things the same, even if the same is slowly killing us. That's why leaving your comfort zone hurts at first. Your mind interprets change as a threat, not a possibility. But here's the paradox. Staying stuck hurts too, just more quietly. You pay for safety with purpose. You trade freedom for predictability. You convince yourself the bars are there for your protection, not your containment. And that's the saddest kind of prison, the one you decorate. Here's the good news. Awareness is the key. Once you see the bars, you can't unsee them. Once you recognize how much of your comfort is just control disguised as peace, the illusion starts to crack. Leaving the cage doesn't happen all at once. It starts with one honest thought. What if this isn't all there is? Then one small act of rebellion, doing something that scares you, just a little. Over time, the unknown becomes less threatening. It becomes a horizon, and when you finally step beyond the invisible walls, it's messy, awkward, and uncertain, but it's real. And real will always be better than safe, because at least out there, when you take 12 steps forward, you're actually going somewhere. Truth hurts, but lies kill slowly. There's a reason people say they want honesty but flinch when they hear it, because truth doesn't arrive gently. It lands like a punch, sudden, undeniable, impossible to unhear. You find out a partner wasn't who you thought they were. You realize the career you built doesn't fulfill you. You look in the mirror one day and see that you've become someone you swore you wouldn't. That's what truth does. It cuts through comfort, and for a moment, it feels unbearable. But here's the twist. Lies don't spare you from pain. They just delay it. And the delay compounds interest. A lie is emotional anesthesia. It keeps you numb while the damage spreads underneath. It tells you everything's fine while your foundation cracks. It lets you sleep a little longer in a burning house. And because it feels safe, you stay. People lie to themselves all the time, not out of malice, but out of survival. I'm happy. I can quit any time. They'll change. I don't care. But every lie has a half-life. and eventually it decays into reality. When it does, the pain isn't smaller. It's sharper. Because now it's mixed with regret. In medicine, there's a term called diagnostic delay, when doctors or patients ignore early symptoms until it's too late to treat the disease easily. That's how most lives unravel, not in one big failure, but in years of small denials. The job that stopped inspiring you 5 years ago, the relationship you knew was over but didn't want to admit it, the truth about yourself you keep editing for comfort. Every time you lie to avoid pain, you make it harder to heal. The truth, by contrast, demands something terrifying but clean. Face it, feel it, act on it. It hurts once, honestly, instead of forever, quietly. And once the shock fades, something unexpected happens. The same truth that broke you begins to rebuild you. It gives you clarity, direction, power, because pain you face becomes strength. Pain you avoid becomes poison. That's why the most peaceful people aren't the ones who never hurt. They're the ones who stopped hiding. Truth doesn't destroy peace. It burns the lies that were pretending to be peace. And yes, it hurts, like disinfectant on a wound. But what's the alternative? To keep bleeding under the bandage and call it healing. You can't build a real life on false ground, so let it hurt. Let it clean. Let it end what needs to end. Because the pain of truth is sharp, but it passes. The pain of lies, that one lasts forever.